We all hope to stay healthy, but the truth is, that's not always the case. Many people deal with serious or minor health problems, and I'm one of them. I wish it weren't true, but I have to learn to live with it. Is it too much to ask my husband to understand what I'm going through? My name is Emily. I'm 29 and I work full-time. It's been 3 years since my husband, Jack, and I got married. Our relationship is generally good, except for one thing. Hey, Emily, wake up. I opened my eyes and saw Jack's face right in front of mine. What happened? You fainted out of nowhere. I still felt dizzy as I tried to sit up. I'm used to this feeling. I have low blood pressure and deal with a condition that makes me feel weak. It can happen even when I'm cooking, so I'm usually extra careful when I'm near the stove. I remembered I was peeling potatoes when I passed out. I felt a chill at the thought of having fainted while holding a knife. What the heck were you doing? Shouldn't he have been more worried? Jack never really understood my condition, even though I've explained it to him many times. He didn't care, and it seemed like he was annoyed. I didn't want him to worry too much, but just a little concern from him would have been nice. Was I asking for too much? We met at work. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but we were in love. Is it normal for things to change after marriage? We got together because of my health condition. I felt dizzy and fainted once while talking to a colleague at work. Jack helped me, and that was how we started dating. But after we got married, he stopped caring. In fact, he seemed to care less. Jack thought my condition was just a form of anemia, so he told me to take iron supplements and eat more liver. He didn't realize it was a more serious problem. Even if I explained it again, I knew he wouldn't listen. It didn't bother me as much anymore that he didn't care, but he seemed frustrated by it. I'm not hungry, I'm going out. Why? I'll be ready in a minute. I don't feel like eating. How could someone who faints just from peeling potatoes not feel worse than you? I'm leaving. Wait, can you grab that meat, please? I sighed as I looked at the potatoes. This was a usual situation. Whenever I had symptoms, Jack would make up an excuse to go out and stay away for hours. But that day, he didn't come back until the next morning. It wasn't just going out. I started to feel anxious. One day, Jack said he had something important to tell me. What is it? I'm taking my parents to Puerto Rico for the long holiday. Wow, that sounds amazing. I clapped my hands in excitement. We'd never taken a trip together after getting married. It felt a little awkward to go with my in-laws, but we had a good relationship, so it could be fun. I started imagining clear oceans and sandy beaches, but then Jack said, "Don't get your hopes up." I gave him a confused look. What do you mean? I'm going with my parents and you're staying home. Why? I was shocked by his response. Why should I stay home? You know you're not well, right? You pass out just by standing for a while. You can't even enjoy sightseeing. We'll have more fun without you there. My symptoms aren't that bad. You're exaggerating. I'm just being honest. My parents agree too, so you're staying. What? It's already decided. I've booked a hotel for 3. I didn't know what to say as I watched him walk out. I was left alone again while he packed for his trip. I thought about protesting to his parents, but I didn't want to cause trouble with them. Even though they seemed to be trying to ruin our relationship, I couldn't bring myself to confront them. The truth is, standing for too long makes me faint. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's hard to predict the symptoms. I guess I would have been a burden on their holiday, so I decided to let it go. While I sat there thinking, I suddenly started feeling dizzy again. Too late, my vision started spinning, and I worried about the sharp objects around me before I fainted again. Hey, Emily, wake up. I felt something nudging me, and then I heard Jack's voice. I realized I was lying on the floor. I opened my eyes and saw Jack standing over me. Jack. Oh my God, this is enough. How many times are you going to pass out? Ouch. Stop. You didn't seem like you were waking up, so I helped you. Be thankful. He pointed at me with his foot. Even though he wasn't kicking me, I couldn't believe he was doing that. I tried to get up, but I still felt dizzy and sick. I couldn't stand up. I feel really sick. I laid back on the floor and Jack clicked his tongue in frustration. No, I didn't need him to act like that. I was upset, but I couldn't find the energy to argue with him. What's next, Jack? I'm leaving now. Be good. I'll be mad if I come home and the house is a mess. No care or concern at all. Huh? You're leaving? You know I'm supposed to go on a trip. My flight's soon. I need to leave now. Wait, help me get to the bed. At least help me. I feel like I'm going to throw up. No way. Stop acting like a baby. You're just dizzy. You still have time to catch your flight, right? You can manage. He didn't care about my unspoken protest and just walked out. I lay there, staring at the door as it closed behind him. Unbelievable. That's awful. Are you mad? Of course I am. What do you think? I planned to talk to my friend the next day. She was shocked and upset too. Anyone would have thought it was terrible after Jack laughed. I managed to get up on my own, but I cried thinking about what he said. I had been feeling mistreated, but this was the worst. My friend's sympathy didn't help much though. What was I going to do? I felt stressed, and to calm my nerves, I had a drink alone that night. Then I saw the name on the screen and was shocked. It was my father-in-law. He was supposed to be with Jack on the trip. Had something happened to him? I quickly sobered up and answered the phone in panic. Hello? Hey, Emily. Sorry to call so late, he said, speaking slowly. No, it's okay. Is everything all right? It's a bit sudden. His next words left me stunned. The next day, my phone kept vibrating in the quiet room. It was Jack calling. Hey, Emily, how's it going? It's sunny and amazing here. Have you been good? His cheerful tone irritated me. I imagined him smiling smugly on the other side of the phone. I'm busy right now. What do you want? Why, you sound upset. Are you mad because I left you behind? I'll get you a souvenir. What do you want? I sighed deeply at his carefree attitude. I said I'm busy. I'm at your mother's wake right now, so let's talk later. What? There was a long silence before he finally responded. His stupidity annoyed me even more. I said I'm at your mother's wake. Huh? Wait, what? Right. I was at my mother-in-law's wake. I know it's a shock, right? You're supposed to be with her in Puerto Rico. It can't be her wake. It's strange, right? Your dad is here too. It's unbelievable, but it's all true. With that, I hung up and turned off my phone. The wake continued peacefully, and it was a real eye-opener. Mom, what are you wearing? Jack showed up, yelling when his family and relatives were having dinner. I had to comment on his appearance. He was wearing a bright blue Hawaiian shirt. The way he looked, like he had just come from a tropical island, was met with cold stares. Why would you come to your mother's wake dressed like that? What? Oh well, I couldn't change after the flight. My phone was off, so he called his father. He rushed back once he got the details, but didn't think to change his clothes. Never mind. What's going on? You heard your mother passed away. It was last night. My father-in-law, who was supposedly with Jack, called me. Oh, Emily, sorry to bother you so late, he said, his voice slow. It's a bit sudden, but my wife just passed away. I dropped my drink in shock. The liquid spilled on the floor, but I couldn't move. She suddenly collapsed this morning. I called an ambulance, but she didn't make it. The cause of death was a heart attack. I couldn't believe it. She had looked healthy. I thought she lived for years. I couldn't wrap my head around it. She was supposed to be with Jack. I can't believe it. You're cheating on me? What? Jack froze at my words. I didn't need to say more. Someone else spoke up. You idiot, you lied and went on vacation with your girlfriend. Dad, what do you mean? I was disgusted by how he acted, and I said, guess what? You left all the evidence at home. You thought I wouldn't find it. After the call with my in-laws, I went through your things, and surprise, I found millions of pieces of proof. There were strange transactions on his credit card, hotel receipts, and tons of photos of him with his girlfriend on his computer. The trip confirmation showed that there were only 2 guests listed instead of 3. And why are you posting pictures of you and your girlfriend on social media? What were you thinking? He posted pictures during the trip. He wasn't stupid enough to post them together, but her reflection was clearly visible in the window. What an idiot. Thanks for leaving proof. I have no affection for someone who let me down while I was sick. I can divorce without any regrets. The divorce, wait, it's not what you think. It's not. What isn't? It's just cheating, right? No, it's not. He couldn't say anything else. Just go back to Puerto Rico. She's waiting for you, right? I rolled my eyes. He kept pleading, but he was silenced by a certain roar. You fool. You're a disgrace to the family. Wait, what are you doing here? Why wouldn't I be? At my sister-in-law's wake, the one scolding him was Jack's uncle, my father-in-law's brother. At that moment, Jack finally realized that not only his dad and I, but the entire family was surrounding him. Wait, it's a misunderstanding. What do we misunderstand? Taking a trip with your girlfriend and leaving your wife behind. You even used your parents for your lie. Jack couldn't say anything back, cornered by his uncle. His father, too, stepped in front of him and said, "Jack, I'm ashamed to have a son like you. And you show up dressed like that at your own mother's wake. I no longer consider you my son. I'm cutting ties with you. Of course, you're terminated from your job." Jack worked in his family's business. He had never been able to keep a job anywhere. He was actually fired from the company where we met after making numerous mistakes. His dad and uncle saved him then. "No, that's not fair." "Shut up. You disregard your wife when she falls ill and go on a trip with your girlfriend. You're in no position to complain. Pack up your things at work." Wait. Jack, wearing a cheerful pie biscuit shirt, turned white in panic. It looked like a scene from a comedy, but it wasn't funny. I added more stress to him. "Don't come back home anymore. I packed your stuff and sent it to your father's house." "What? How could you do such a selfish thing?" "Why not? The apartment is in my name. Did you forget? I have no interest in sharing it with a cheater. There's no space for you there. I won't even let you in. By the way, I changed the locks so you can't get in anyway." "Oh my God." Jack screamed and collapsed on the floor. Afterward, I hired a lawyer and divorced Jack. I got a large sum of alimony from him, as well as compensation from his girlfriend. The girlfriend, who had never imagined being charged, was fed up with Jack and they broke up. He had been spending a large amount of money on her. But after losing his job, he couldn't pay off his credit card debt. He learned from his father and uncle in the end. His father didn't allow him to move back in, so he ended up living in a tiny, shady apartment. His uncle found him a job to help him pay back his loan. But I hear the job is physically demanding. "Emily, help me. I'm going to collapse from exhaustion," he lamented over the phone. "Really? If you collapse, I'll take a trip to Puerto Rico then," I replied. I laughed at Jack, who was down, and hung up on him. I don't know what happened to him afterwards since I blocked him, but I assume he doesn't have a pleasant life. Years later, I met someone new. He's into wellness and understands my disorder. Maybe he's the one. I've been experiencing those symptoms lately. Perhaps peace of mind is the best treatment. I saw a shy expression as he held out a ring to me. I'm excited about the possibility of a happy future. I'm Elizabeth, though most people call me Liz or Lizzie. A few call me Betty, but I've never liked that one much. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family: mom, dad, and my older sister, Kate. Kate's 7 years older than me, which made a big difference. From as early as I can remember, our house was practically a shrine to Kate. Every wall was covered with photos of her first smile, her first steps, or her scribbled masterpieces that mom and dad treated like fine art. I was there too, but just kind of there. I got used to it, wearing Kate's hand-me-downs, playing with her old toys. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't know anything else. I learned to stay quiet and go with the flow. As time went on, the pattern held steady. Kate got new clothes. I got her old ones. She received the latest toys. I played with what she'd outgrown. But I never complained. I just existed. When I reached high school, Kate had already moved out for college on a scholarship. I thought maybe, with her gone, my parents would notice me more. But no, it was still all about Kate, her college adventures, her new boyfriend, her bright future. Then one Sunday she burst in, grinning from ear to ear. "Mom, Dad, I'm getting married," she announced, as if she'd just won an award. Mom burst into tears of joy, and Dad whooped with excitement. I just sat there, wondering if anyone realized I was in the room. Kate turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, right?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, Kate, congratulations." As everyone hugged and laughed, I slipped out of the room. No one noticed. They never did. Kate's wedding turned into a huge production. One night, I overheard Mom and Dad whispering in the kitchen. "We'll have to take out a loan," Dad said, sounding worn. "I know," Mom sighed, "but it's Kate's big day. We can't let her down." My stomach twisted. They were going into debt for her wedding. I wanted to point out how absurd this was, but I knew better. My opinions didn't hold much weight here. The wedding was lavish, with Kate looking like a princess and my parents beaming with pride. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, feeling invisible as always. Then after her honeymoon, Kate dropped another bombshell. "I've decided to be a housewife," she announced at Sunday dinner. "Jack makes enough for both of us." I watched my parents try to hide their concern behind forced smiles. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said, "if it makes you happy." I wanted to scream. They'd taken on debt for her wedding, and now she wasn't even going to work. But as usual, I kept quiet. Soon enough, Kate was pregnant, with twins. Mom and Dad were overjoyed, spending every free moment doting on Kate and preparing for the babies. Then came the next idea. "We should help them buy a house," Mom suggested one night. "They'll need the space with 2 babies." Dad nodded. "We could make a down payment on that nice place nearby." I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Are you serious?" I blurted out. "You're already in debt from the wedding, and now you want to buy them a house." They looked at me, almost surprised, like they'd forgotten I was there. "Elizabeth," Mom said, her tone sharp, "this is what family does. We help each other." The twins were born a few months later, 2 little boys as adorable as could be. Mom and Dad spent every moment at Kate's new house, cooing over the babies. Meanwhile, I was finishing high school, thinking about college but wondering how I'd pay for it. Finally, one night, I worked up the courage to ask, "Mom, Dad, I'd been looking at colleges." "That's nice, dear," Mom said, not glancing up from the photo album she was making of the twins. I took a deep breath. I was wondering, could you help me with tuition? They exchanged that look, the one that meant they'd rather discuss anything else. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, sweetie, we'd love to, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and helping with the house, we can cover half," Mom interrupted, as if that was generous. "But you'll need to figure out the rest on your own." I felt like I'd been punched. Half. After everything they'd done for Kate, half was all they could offer me. But I knew it was pointless to argue. "Okay," I said softly, "thanks." As I turned to walk back to my room, I heard them resume chatting about the twins' latest adorable antics. Closing my door, I leaned against it and for the first time in years, let myself cry. I ended up enrolling in the local community college, not my dream, but the only option I could afford. To cover the gap, I took a part-time job at a nearby diner. Balancing classes and waiting tables was exhausting. Most nights, I came home dead on my feet, dreaming only of collapsing into bed. But even that small comfort was often snatched away. It started one Friday evening. I'd just finished a grueling shift and was looking forward to face-planting into my pillow when I walked in to find Kate in the living room, the twins crawling around her feet. "Oh, Lizzie," she exclaimed. "Thank God you're here. I'm at my wit's end with these 2. Can you watch them for a bit? Jack and I haven't had a date night in ages." Before I could respond, she'd slipped out the door, leaving me with 2 screaming toddlers. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring down at my nephews. Don't get me wrong, I love the little terrors, but this wasn't what I'd signed up for. Mom wandered in from the kitchen. "Your sister's exhausted, honey. This is what family does. Besides, it'll be good practice for when you have your own kids." Kids? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. This became the new normal. Every weekend, without fail, Kate would drop off the twins and vanish. Sometimes for errands, other times to grab dinner or catch a movie with Jack. And every weekend, I ended up as the unasked babysitter. One Saturday, after a week from hell with midterms, I had enough. Kate had just breezed out the door, leaving the twins mid-tantrum. I turned to Mom and Dad, my voice shaky. "This isn't fair. I'm exhausted. I work, I study, and now I'm expected to give up my weekends too." Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Lizzie, your sister needs the help. You should be glad to do it." "But what about what I need?" I protested. "I'm running myself ragged here." Mom sighed. "Elizabeth, don't be selfish. Kate has 2 kids. You don't know how hard that is." I gave up. It was clear they weren't going to listen. So I resigned myself to my new reality. Classes during the week, work in the evenings, and unpaid babysitting on weekends. A personal life? That was a joke. The closest thing I had to a social life was small talk with customers at the diner. Dates? Forget it. Between work, school, and watching the twins, I barely had time to shower, let alone meet someone. I was at my breaking point. The constant juggling of school, work, and forced babysitting left me drained, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I needed a real break, a genuine escape from everything and everyone. So one evening, I made an announcement. "Mom, Dad, I'm taking a few days off and going to the beach." The response surprised me. For once, they actually seemed supportive. "That's wonderful, Lizzie," Mom said, looking genuinely happy. "Where are you staying?" I told them about a modest motel I'd found online right by the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was all I could afford. Dad nodded approvingly. "Good for you, kiddo. You deserve a break." I nearly did a double take. Were they actually acknowledging my need for rest? The day finally arrived. I packed my bag, hopped on a bus, and felt the weight lifting from my shoulders with every mile that passed. When I arrived at the coast, I could hardly believe my luck. The motel was small and a bit rundown, but the view of the ocean was breathtaking. I dropped my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach, inhaling the salty air. For the first time in months, I felt like I could truly breathe. I treated myself to lunch at a little seaside cafe, savoring each bite. No screaming kids, no assignments, no customers. Just me, my thoughts, and the calming sound of the waves. As the sun began to set, I returned to the motel, ready for a night of peaceful solitude. But as I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. "Surprise, Lizzie." I froze. There, outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Kate, with the twins running in circles around them. What are you doing here?" I stammered, my heart sinking. "We couldn't let you be all alone on vacation," Mom chirped. "We thought we'd surprise you. We're right next door." They'd booked one of the nicer rooms, I noticed, while I was in the budget option. Before I could fully process what was happening, Kate was already pushing the twins toward me. "The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you?" "I want to take a walk on the beach. And I need to run to the store," Mom added. "We'll be back soon." Just like that, they disappeared, leaving me with two hyperactive 3-year-olds tugging at my hands. What followed was nothing short of chaos. The twins tore through my tiny room like miniature tornadoes, ripping curtains, breaking glasses, and somehow managing to clog the toilet with apples. I ended up shelling out money I didn't have for repairs and to call a plumber. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than ever. The final straw came when Kate, oblivious, sighed and complained about how tired she was from all the traveling. I finally lost it. The argument that erupted was epic. I yelled, Mom cried, Kate sulked, and the twins screamed in the background. That night, I packed my bags, determined to leave, and caught the first bus home in the morning. As the coastline slipped away, a shift happened inside me. This couldn't go on. Something had to change. When I dragged myself through the front door, exhaustion heavy on my shoulders, Dad barely looked up from the TV. I trudged to my room, mind swirling with emotions and vague plans. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I was halfway through packing when I heard the front door slam. "Elizabeth, where are you?" Mom's voice rang through the house, sharp and irritated. She stormed into my room, face flushed with anger. "I can't believe you just left us there. Do you know how hard it was to manage the twins on our own?" I got back the urge to remind her that I'd been managing the twins alone countless times before. Instead, I just kept packing. Mom's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I replied, voice steady. "I'm moving out. I need my own life." Their reactions were swift and predictable. "How could you be so selfish?" Mom cried. "After everything we've done for you." Dad's face went red. "You ungrateful girl. Have you thought about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins?" Something snapped inside me. My sister. What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need? Mom gasped, and I continued. "Kate has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my own life." Dad glared. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep paying for your college. You'll be on your own." I looked at them, these people who were supposed to love and support me, and realized they were strangers. "Fine," I said, zipping up my suitcase. "I'd rather be on my own than live like this. No life of my own, just constant demands and screaming kids. I'm done." I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase downstairs. They followed, shouting, but I tuned them out. As I reached the door, Mom made one last attempt. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, then opened the door without looking back. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a friend's couch while searching for a more permanent place. Eventually, I connected with a girl from my study group who needed a roommate. We found a tiny apartment we could just barely afford between the two of us. With my parents cutting me off, I picked up more shifts at the diner, working almost full-time on top of my classes. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it, when exhaustion was so overwhelming I could barely think. But for the first time, I felt free. No one made demands on my time. No one guilted me into babysitting or expected me to put their needs before my own. The apartment was small, my bed just a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I had. Every all-nighter, every extra shift, every missed event, it was all for my future. 2 years flew by, and on graduation day, I sat in the auditorium, scanning the crowd. A small part of me hoped to see a familiar face, Mom, Dad, even Kate, but the seats I reserved remained empty. Life after college felt like stepping into a whole new world. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and for the first time in years I had a steady income that wasn't just scraping by. I rented my own apartment, nothing fancy, but all mine, no roommates, no family drama, just peace and quiet, and it was glorious. I started doing all the things I'd missed, going on dates, making new friends, even having a few short-lived relationships. It was fun to be young and carefree for once. My parents and I kept in touch, barely. We talked maybe once a month, stilted conversations filled with awkward silences and thinly veiled disapproval. They were still sore about me moving out, and I wasn't in a rush to mend fences. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans with friends, dinner and drinks, nothing wild. But a week before, Mom called. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice oddly cheerful, "we want you to come over for your birthday. The whole family will be there." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Walking into my parents' house was like stepping back in time. Kate and her husband were there, the twins, now 7, running around like little tornadoes, aunts, uncles, and cousins mingling and smiling. "Happy birthday, Lizzie," they chorused as I walked in. I put on a smile, accepting the hugs and well wishes. Then Mom handed me an envelope with a flourish. "This is from all of us," she said, beaming. As I opened the envelope, my stomach sank. Inside was a ticket to a beach resort. "We're all going," Dad announced proudly. "A big family vacation. We've paid for everything." I froze. A family vacation, with the twins. It was my ruined beach trip all over again. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Mom squeezed my arm, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare make a scene, not in front of everyone." So, I forced a smile and thanked them, all while screaming internally. The party wound down, relatives trickled out, and finally, it was just us. Me, Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm not going," I said flatly. "What?" Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." "Exactly," I replied, "and I'm not interested in spending my vacation babysitting your kids again." Kate burst into tears. "You don't love us at all, do you? You don't care about your nephews." "I care about them just fine," I snapped, "but if I wanted kids, I'd have my own." The argument went in circles. Mom called me ungrateful, Dad looked disappointed, and Kate kept crying, all trying to guilt and pressure me into giving in. Finally, exhausted, I said, "Fine, I'll go." They all looked relieved, like they'd won some great victory, but they had no idea what I had in mind. The day of departure arrived, and I found myself at the airport surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were practically bouncing with excitement, already making plans for all the alone time they'd have while I watched the twins. "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie," Kate told the boys, winking at me. "She'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even go snorkeling." As we approached the check-in counter, I made my move. "Oh, I need to use the restroom," I said, feigning discomfort. "You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by luggage and excited children. I watched them get in line, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. My heart pounded as I approached a different check-in counter. I handed over my passport and the ticket I'd bought weeks ago for a flight to a small, peaceful island resort. Once through security, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. With shaking hands, I typed a message to Mom. "I'm not coming with you. I'm going on my own vacation. Enjoy your trip." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone, avoiding the inevitable fallout. When I settled into my seat on the plane, I turned my phone back on briefly. It immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. I listened to one voicemail from Mom, her voice shrill and furious. "Elizabeth Morgan, how dare you abandon your family like this? You've ruined everything." Your sister is in tears, her husband is furious. They were counting on you to watch the boys. You're the most selfish, ungrateful. As the plane took off, I sipped my champagne and gazed out the window. Yes, I felt a pang of guilt, but overwhelmingly, I felt free, like I could finally breathe for the first time in as long as I could remember. I was going on a trip that was just for me. No obligations, no babysitting, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and whatever I decided to do. When I arrived on the small tropical island, the warm breeze greeted me as if to say, "Welcome to freedom." I checked into my resort, a modest but charming place right on the beach. Out of curiosity, I turned my phone back on, and it instantly flooded with hundreds of messages, missed calls, and voicemails. I scrolled through a few with a mix of amusement and trepidation. "How could you do this to us?" from Mom. "You ruined everything," from Kate. "You're so selfish," Elizabeth, from Dad. I couldn't help but smile. For once, I'd chosen myself over their demands. I turned the phone off again and locked it in the hotel safe. For the next week, I was unreachable, and what a week it was. I lounged on the beach, read books uninterrupted, went snorkeling, and even tried surfing. I chatted with other vacationers, went on a few casual dates, and stayed out as late as I wanted. No schedule, no responsibilities, no screaming kids. Just me and the rhythm of the waves. Too soon, it was time to head home. I returned to my apartment tanned, rested, and more centered than I felt in years. But the real world was quick to intrude on my newfound peace. The very next day, there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Mom and Kate, faces red with anger. "How dare you?" Mom screeched, barging in without invitation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kate wasn't far behind. "You ruined our entire vacation." The boys were devastated. They launched into a tirade, voices overlapping as they hurled accusations and insults. I was selfish, ungrateful, a terrible daughter and sister. I owed them for the ticket they'd bought for the childcare I hadn't provided. I let them rant for a few minutes, their words washing over me without sticking. Finally, I spoke, calm but firm. "That's enough. I don't owe you anything. Not money, not childcare, not my time. I'm an adult, and I get to make my own choices." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I'm not discussing this further. Please leave. When you're ready to treat me with respect and have a calm conversation, we can talk. Until then, it's best we don't communicate." They stared, shocked into silence, then stormed out with a few choice words. As the door slammed behind them, I let out a long breath. It hadn't been easy, but it felt right. Over the next few weeks, I made some big changes. I found a new apartment in a different part of town and moved without giving my family my address. I threw myself into my work and picked up new hobbies, painting, yoga, even learning a new language. There were moments of doubt and pangs of guilt, but every time I came home to my peaceful apartment, made plans without worrying about babysitting, or pursued a new interest just for me, I knew I'd made the right choice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday my family and I will find a way to have a healthy relationship, maybe not. But I do know this. I'll face whatever comes on my own terms, standing tall and unapologetic in the life I've chosen for myself. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood outside Chicago, my life felt simple and predictable. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years working on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, has been a secretary at Lincoln Elementary for as long as I can remember. They gave me everything they could, but we never had much money. I'm Tasha Mitchell, or at least I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After college, I earned an accounting degree and landed a job at Anderson & Partners, a mid-sized firm. The pay was decent, the work steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. But that all changed one rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing for my morning coffee before work, and he was headed to some important meeting. My coffee splashed all over his expensive suit, and I could have crawled into a hole right then and there. "I'm so sorry," I said, frantically dabbing at his jacket with napkins. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." Instead of getting mad, he laughed. "Don't worry about it, but you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight." One dinner turned into several, and Marcus was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But Marcus never made me feel beneath him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he put it. Then came the day I met his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget the way Victoria looked at me, like I was something stuck to her shoe. "So Tasha," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Marcus tells us you're an accountant. Yes, I am, I replied, trying to keep my composure. How practical, she said, her smile as thin as her tone. When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you think I'd confess they were criminals. James barely spoke to me during dinner, only addressing Marcus about work. 3 months later, when Marcus proposed, I said yes without hesitation, convinced I could win over his parents with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. It felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. Marcus was over the moon, spinning me around our enormous living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James softened a bit. Though Victoria couldn't help but remark, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., or JJ as we called him, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered. Not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ was perfect. The first 2 years of parenthood were good. Marcus was a natural with JJ, coming home early to play with him, reading him bedtime stories, and taking us both to the park on weekends. Marcus thrived as the financial director at Reynolds, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ in our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they showered their grandson with expensive gifts and insisted on regular visits. But something shifted around Jay's 3rd birthday. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse. "Big project at work, honey. You wouldn't understand." The man who once rushed home to see his son now barely made it in time for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her air scarf perfectly arranged despite the wind. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" Confused, I stared at her. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha," she said, her eyes narrowing. "The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach sank. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed further. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" she asked, her voice growing sharp. That night, I waited up until Marcus came home at 11:30 p.m. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me sitting in the dark living room. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. The other wives know how to carry themselves. They discuss art, wine, summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you have talked about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's work in the cafeteria?" His words felt like a slap in the face. "I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed." "I was proud of you when we were dating," he replied, "but I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more." I went to bed crying that night, telling myself it was just work stress, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus texted that he was working late again, and I was cleaning around the apartment when I came across his open laptop on his desk. I'd never snooped before, but something about the screen caught my eye. I sat down at his desk, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. An email thread with someone named Sophia Laurent. My hand shook as I read their messages. Hundreds of them, dating back months. Sophia had been hired a year ago as a new marketing executive at Reynolds. They spoke about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who had no idea what was going on. There were pictures of jewelry Marcus bought her, weekend trips he took with her while telling me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. "Care to explain?" I asked quietly, holding up one of the printed emails. He laughed, as if it was a casual conversation. "Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not. Sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around," I shouted. Marcus poured himself a coffee like we were talking about the weather. Here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey, he added with a nasty grin, maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally, if you're lucky. Tears blurred my vision as I grabbed JJ's backpack, stuffing clothes inside. JJ was still asleep, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him. Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go? I walked past him, taking my son and my purse, along with the USB drive, and didn't say another word. By the time we reached my parents' house, I was a mess. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. 3 days later, the divorce papers arrived. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them, wearing the smug smirk. I always knew you weren't good enough for my son, she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But the worst was yet to come. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming, during the first hearing, Marcus's lawyer painted a picture of me that was far from the truth. Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year, he argued. She drinks excessively, creates unwarranted scenes of jealousy, and has become unstable. Fortunately, I had been smart enough to gather evidence. When my lawyer presented the email exchanges between Marcus and Sophia, revealing his affair and cruel remarks about me, the judge's demeanor shifted. The timestamps on those emails proved I wasn't the one causing drama. I hadn't even known about the affair until I discovered those messages. The judge turned to Marcus. Mr. Reynolds, you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving and gaslighting her. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit as the judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus receiving visitation every other weekend and a substantial child support obligation. I returned to my full-time job at the accounting firm, while my parents, without a second thought, stepped in to help care for JJ during their retirement. They were amazing, never once complaining as they embraced their new role as full-time grandparents. Life settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, peaceful, and fulfilling. Then, one Saturday morning, everything changed. A black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, followed by Sophia, tall, blonde, and clad in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I'm here to see my son, Marcus announced, pushing past me as if he owned the place. Sophia wrinkled her nose and looked around the room. Oh my God, she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. This place is literally a dump, like an actual kennel. Watch your mouth, I snapped. Turning to Marcus, she said, Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people. She gestured toward my parents, who stood frozen in the doorway. They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising the Reynolds heir. Get out, I seethed, my body trembling with rage. Both of you. Get out of my parents' house, now. Marcus sneered at me. Or what? You think you've won in court? Just wait. I shoved them both toward the door. Get out. An adult. Sophia purred to Marcus. This place probably has fleas anyway. As they drove away, I stood there, shaking, before pulling my parents into a tight hug. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But as that Range Rover disappeared down the street, a sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, furious even. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. You know, sweetheart, he said, sitting down across from me, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I raised an eyebrow. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator, real thorough, knows how to dig without leaving a trace. I thought about Sophia's smug face, her cruel words, and the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she commented on my LinkedIn profile, "Look at this pathetic 1/8. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore." Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." How much does Mike charge? I asked, already knowing my answer. 2 days later, I sat in Mike Sullivan's small downtown office. A gruff man with kind eyes, Mike had known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed as I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. You need to come to my office, he said. You're going to want to see this in person. He handed me a thick file. First off, he began, Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson. My hand trembled as I read through the file. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, hopping from one rich man to the next, living off their money until they grew tired of her or caught onto her scams. She'd used different names in different cities, always disappearing before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. Mike pointed to some bank transfers. She's been siphoning small amounts from company accounts. Enough to go unnoticed, but it adds up. He flipped through more pages. And these emails. She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors, product launches, merger plans, everything. I sat back, my mind reeling. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist, and she'd sunk her claws not just into my husband but into the entire Reynolds empire. There's one more thing, Mike said, pulling out another folder. Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline. I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't act yet. I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Tasha, Victoria's cold voice said, James Reynolds' 60th birthday party is this Saturday. You're invited. JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. Since he's too young to come alone, you'll need to escort him. She let the sentence hang in the air, her tone dismissive. Just remember, you're only invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was every bit as ostentatious as you'd imagine. The mansion gleamed with gold and crystal, waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental gaze as JJ and I walked into the room. Oh, you came, Victoria said, her smile tight. Well, JJ darling, come give your grandmother a kiss. I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like some prize show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse, which contained Mike's file, and waited. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She wore a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. Everyone, Marcus announced, clinking his glass, I have an announcement to make. He pulled Sophia closer. I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren. She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring. Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally, a woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard-educated, from a wonderful family, unlike some people, James added, shooting a look at me. Sophia beamed under their attention. I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family, and I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves. That was my cue. I stood up, hands steady as I pulled out the file. Speaking of what people deserve, I said loudly, I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds. Tasha, don't make a scene, Marcus warned. I ignored him, pulling out the first document. Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson, how's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity? The color drained from Sophia's face. What is she talking about? Victoria demanded. Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's ID? I asked, my voice steady. The real Sophia Loren is a school teacher in Minnesota. This woman, I pointed at her, is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist. Sophia shrieked, she's lying. But I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. And here's my personal favorite, I said, pulling out more documents. Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails. She's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp for months. James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. The Wagner deal. The Collins merger. It was you? I can explain, Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. The real Carla Larson, I said, savoring the moment, has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room went deadly quiet as they read through the evidence. Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. and Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos in minutes. James Reynolds' face turned an alarming shade of purple as he read the documents. "Get out," he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer out excuses. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here." "James, darling," she attempted, reaching for his arm. "These are all lies. I can explain everything." "Explain?" He shook the documents at her. "Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal. That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins, they were our biggest competitor. And you've been feeding them everything." Victoria, who had been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up, venom in her eyes. "You common prostitute," she hissed. "You thought you could con your way into our family." Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Marcus, baby, tell them." But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. "If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, "I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way." After Sophia fled, James turned to his son, his voice low with fury. "You brought this woman into our company," he said. "Gave her access to confidential information, all because what? She was pretty. Had nice legs?" "Dad, I didn't know." "You didn't know. Didn't check. Just thought with your—" He glanced at JJ and modified his language. "With everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow." "But Dad, and that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live." Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. "Tasha," she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. "We owe you an apology, a significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage." James nodded solemnly. "We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than others." 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers uncovered, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment. It's not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but it's perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company. The least we could do, James had said, handing me the keys. After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. Jay's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did. Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7:00 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ is still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and surprisingly for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips on growing roses. "Sarah," Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, "you and Tom raised a remarkable daughter. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. We always knew what Tasha was capable of." Mom replied with quiet dignity, "Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay." Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. "Do you miss Daddy?" he asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are. Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come, from the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better. I was completely taken aback when my husband Jonathan suggested out of the blue that I should move back to my parents' house, even though they were already living with us. His sudden declaration left me speechless. He seemed to think he was being perfectly logical, though, and with a blunt tone, he asked, "Do you have a problem with that? Don't argue with me. I'm fine with divorcing you if you do." His behavior had grown cold and distant recently, and I'd been wrestling with my own frustrations. I had even considered the possibility of divorce, but I never imagined he'd be the one to force me out of our home. After all, I was the one covering our $3,200 monthly expenses. Did he even recognize that? As I stood there in disbelief, he grew more agitated and demanded, "Leave this house now. My parents won't feel comfortable with you here." I couldn't understand why I was suddenly the one who had to go, but in that moment, I agreed. "Fine, I'll take all my things with me," I replied. He seemed satisfied with my compliance and, without another word, said, "Then do it," before walking away. Without hesitation, I contacted a store to sell my belongings. My name is Betty, and I live with Jonathan, who's 3 years older than me. We met through mutual friends, and what started as a casual introduction turned into an entire day spent together. Jonathan had shared his dream of becoming a voiceover artist, and I was drawn to his deep, soothing voice. I've always been fond of such tones. He must have felt the same connection because we exchanged numbers and began planning more outings. Before long, we were in a relationship without ever formally discussing it. At the time, I had just graduated from college and started my career. Dating someone with more life experience like Jonathan felt exciting. My friend Laura voiced concerns about our age difference, but I brushed it off. "It's only 3 years," I told her, and I genuinely liked Jonathan. Feeling confident in his affection for me, Laura eventually came around, trusting my judgment. Jonathan and I had been together for 2 years when he brought up the idea of marriage. I had already told my parents about him, including his age, and they were eager to meet him, hopeful about our future together. I often wondered when he would propose, and in typical Jonathan fashion, it happened during one of his regular visits to my apartment. We were just lounging around, enjoying each other's company. It wasn't the most romantic setting, but it felt right for us. Then, without much fanfare, he popped the question. I casually responded, "Sure, let's get married." Maybe we both approached the idea with a laid-back attitude. After Jonathan proposed, we made the usual rounds of visiting each other's parents. But when we went to his family's house, it quickly became clear that I didn't quite mesh with them. The house was filled with decor meant to imitate old-fashioned luxury, but it all felt rather forced. His parents wore expensive clothes and flashy jewelry, giving off the impression that they were trying too hard to appear wealthy. It was clear our tastes and values were different, and I doubted we'd ever truly get along. During the visit, Jonathan's mother even made a hurtful comment about my appearance. I was stunned by how the family of the man I intended to marry could behave that way. But in the end, I reminded myself that I was marrying Jonathan, not his family. We were set to start our own lives together, and if I didn't enjoy being around his parents, I could always limit my time with them. With that thought, I decided not to let it bother me too much. After our wedding, as we settled into our new condo, I began to notice that Jonathan seemed distracted. One day, out of the blue, he asked, "Hey, who was that woman in the blue dress at our wedding?" Given that several guests had worn blue, I couldn't immediately figure out who he meant. "Which woman in a blue dress?" I asked, trying to jog my memory. "You know, the one who gave a speech as your best friend," he clarified. "Are you talking about Laura?" I replied, realizing that Laura had, in fact, worn a blue dress. "Yes, that's her," Jonathan said, though his tone carried a hint of unease. I was puzzled. "What's wrong with Laura?" I asked, sensing something off. "Oh, it's nothing," he said, brushing it off. "Just something I noticed the other day. I thought I saw someone who looked like her on my way to work," Jonathan said, his expression a bit unsettled. "It reminded me she was your best friend who spoke at our wedding." I was confused by Jonathan's sudden curiosity about Laura and his flustered response, but before I could ask more, he laughed awkwardly and retreated to his room. Not long after, Laura called me, brimming with excitement. "Betty, my boyfriend's coming back to Canada next year. she exclaimed. Laura and her boyfriend had been together since high school, having known each other since childhood. He had moved away in middle school, but they stayed close, first through letters and then by reconnecting in high school when he finally confessed his feelings for her. I had always loved hearing about Laura's romantic adventures. Even though her boyfriend had been working abroad for a few years, their relationship had remained strong. "Do you think he'll propose when he's back?" I teased. Laura giggled. "Maybe, but you're always jumping ahead, Betty." "Well, if he does, make sure to invite me to the wedding," I joked. "I'll expect another heartfelt speech like the one you gave at mine." "Oh, of course," Laura said, laughing. "But don't set the bar too high." We both chuckled, sipping our tea and enjoying the familiar comfort of our friendship. Laura had always been there for me, and I for her, sharing our lives and supporting each other through any struggles. Around this time, though, I began noticing some changes in Jonathan's routine. He started coming home later and later. "Working late again tonight?" I asked one evening as he walked through the door. "Yeah, why? Do you think I shouldn't work?" he snapped, a defensive edge in his voice. Jonathan had never let go of his dream of becoming a voiceover artist, and while I admired his dedication, it was starting to take its toll. He juggled several part-time jobs to pay for his voice artist training, but all his earnings went straight to that, leaving me to cover all of our living expenses. Saving money together felt impossible, and the strain was becoming more obvious with each passing day. As his hours at his part-time job grew longer, my concern deepened. "Hey, haven't you been working too much lately?" I asked, trying to sound supportive. "They shouldn't be making you do so much overtime, especially for a part-time job." He brushed me off, unwilling to discuss it, but deep down, I knew his relentless pursuit of his dream was starting to create a rift between us, both financially and emotionally. One day, I finally spoke up. "I told you, I'm worried." "I'm fine. More money is always better. Just keep your opinions to yourself." Jonathan snapped back, his tone colder than ever. By that point, he had grown distant, barely acknowledging me, and had stopped using my name altogether. He only referred to me as you when we spoke, and I had hoped that marriage would bring more warmth, more connection between us. Instead, his words had turned sharp and dismissive. The gentle, soothing voice I had fallen in love with had become rough and harsh. Jonathan had also been drinking more, and his voice even sounded hoarse at times, a concerning issue for someone aspiring to be a voiceover artist. Yet he showed no interest in discussing his health or making any changes. Conversations with him became rare, and eventually, he started avoiding me completely, even when we were in the same room. Amidst all of this, Laura called me, saying she had something important to discuss. I was eager to meet up, desperate for a break from the tension at home. We decided to meet at a cafe, and when we arrived, Laura carefully chose a booth with a clear view of the counter and staff. "You picked this spot on purpose?" I asked, noticing her cautious demeanor. "Yes," she replied, her expression serious. "I want a place where the staff can see if there's someone suspicious around." "A suspicious person? Is that what you wanted to talk about?" I asked, growing concerned. Laura nodded, her face tight with worry. She explained that ever since she left her job a month ago, she had felt like someone was following her. Lately, she even sensed she was being watched on her days off. The reason she picked that particular booth was because she feared the person might try to eavesdrop on our conversation. "Have you gone to the police?" I asked. "I did, but since there's been no direct contact, they said there isn't much they can do," she sighed. "What about your boyfriend? Isn't he coming back next month? Maybe he can help," I suggested, hoping she had someone nearby for support. "I'm planning to talk to him, but I wanted to talk to you first. You're closer," she explained, her voice tinged with unease. The weight of Laura's words hung in the air, and as we sat there, I realized that both of us were caught in unsettling situations. Her with a potential stalker, and me with a marriage that seemed to be unraveling before my eyes. I understood Laura's need for immediate support. She hadn't gotten a clear look at her stalker, making the situation even more frightening. She couldn't tell if the person was a man or a woman, and the constant fear was wearing her down. Determined to help, I discreetly started watching from a distance, hoping to identify who was following her. At the same time, I was wrestling with my own troubled relationship with Jonathan, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it yet. Then, I made a shocking discovery. The person shadowing Laura was none other than my husband, Jonathan. He had always claimed to be working late, but I noticed that after his shifts, he would linger near Laura's workplace and follow her when she left. Seeing him do this was beyond unsettling. The man responsible for my best friend's fear was my own husband. Jonathan's behavior completely shattered my perception of him. The man I had once loved, the one I thought I knew, now seemed like a stranger. That disturbing grin he wore as he followed Laura chilled me to the bone, and the love I had once felt turned to ice. I knew I had to tell Laura the truth. I urged her to move immediately for her safety. With help from her colleagues, we arranged for someone to drive her from the underground parking lot to her new residence, taking every precaution to ensure she remained safe. As Laura made her escape, Jonathan's frustration grew. His anger eventually erupted. "My parents are going to live here, so you need to go back to your parents' house," he demanded one day, completely out of the blue. I was shocked by the sudden and unreasonable ultimatum. "If you have a problem with that, then I'm fine with divorcing you," he spat, losing his temper. Though I had already considered divorce many times before, hearing him say it so callously hit me hard. The reality of our crumbling relationship finally became undeniable. I couldn't believe Jonathan thought he could just kick me out of the home I was paying for $3,200 a month, every single month. Did he even remember that? I gave him a skeptical look, but he just snapped, "Just leave already. My parents can't move in if you're still here." His words didn't make any sense. "Why do I have to leave? I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Okay, I'll take everything I bought with me," I replied calmly, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Jonathan, impatient, waved me off. "Hurry up, then," he muttered as he walked away. Wasting no time, I contacted a local buyback service. The next day, they arrived at our apartment. Jonathan watched with a smirk, thinking I was just packing up to leave. His smugness quickly evaporated when the workers began evaluating all our furniture and appliances, everything except for the items in his room. Once the staff finished, they handed me a quote. "The total value is $299,000, the worker said. "Okay, sell it all," I replied without hesitation. Jonathan's shock was instant. He grabbed my arm, his voice panicked. "Why are you selling everything? My parents are going to live here. How can they without any furniture?" I pulled my arm free and looked him dead in the eye. "What do you mean? When we got married, you told me you were broke because of your acting classes. You asked me to handle the rent, the furniture, and all our living expenses. Now, with your parents moving in, you can cover the $3,200 a month yourself, right?" Jonathan went pale as reality hit him. Desperate to save face, he tried to regain his composure. "You think talking about money will stop the divorce? Who do you think you are?" he sneered. "I've already gotten close to a rich lady," he added, striking a ridiculous pose. His words made my blood boil, but I stayed calm, remembering how Jonathan had been stalking Laura recently. If that was his idea of getting close, his perception of relationships was more twisted than I thought. Laura, who came from a wealthy family, her grandfather a successful businessman, and her father his successor, never flaunted her money. She lived just like the rest of us, modest and down to earth. Jonathan, however, must have found out about Laura's background and saw her as a ticket to the life he wanted. It infuriated me that he thought wealth made someone more desirable, but I knew the truth. Laura would never be interested in him. She had been with her high school boyfriend for years, and he was returning soon with plans to marry her. Jonathan's delusions would crumble soon enough, and I wasn't going to be around to witness the fallout. When I mentioned that Laura felt uneasy because someone had been stalking her, Jonathan was taken aback. He was shocked to hear that Laura found him creepy and that they weren't as close as he believed. "I always walked Laura home," he protested defensively. "You're lucky I didn't call the police," I shot back, my tone sharp. "But I didn't know she had a boyfriend." "He's been away. She picked me over someone she doesn't know," Jonathan insisted, trying to justify his misunderstanding of their relationship. "They've been writing letters since they were kids and talk almost every day. Unlike you, who only has part-time jobs, her boyfriend is successful. Even her dad likes him," I pointed out. Jonathan's expression turned profoundly sad as the reality of the situation sank in. It was clear that his fantasies about forming a relationship with Laura were just that, delusions. As the movers arrived to take our belongings, Jonathan seemed somewhat relieved. "I guess you're all I've got now. You'll always support my dream of becoming a voiceover artist, won't you? He asked, attempting to appear unfazed. I met his gaze with steely determination. Sorry, but I've already begun divorce proceedings. From now on, we should communicate through our lawyers, I said coldly. Thinking I still had feelings for him, Jonathan clung to me. Don't say that. Haven't we been getting along all this time? We've been getting along ever since you discovered that my best friend, Laura, is wealthy. You've become distant and started spending time with her right after our wedding. I realize now that I made a mistake, I continued, my voice steady. Jonathan broke down in tears, and despite being older, his childish weeping only made him less endearing to me. I could no longer bear to be near him. Enough, I snapped. I've also informed your Uncle Uncle about the divorce. You know he's a tough man. Well, he's decided to work for him, which means I can no longer support your voiceover dreams. You barely practice as it is. It might be time to accept reality and stay away from Laura. If you don't, I'll call the police. With those final words, I left, determined not to look back. For now, I would stay with my parents, though I considered moving closer to my workplace if I found a suitable place. Meanwhile, as expected, Jonathan ended up working for his uncle, and his parents, who had plans to rely on him financially after his marriage to Laura, also moved in with him, all of them now working for his uncle. It seemed that exploiting others was a family trait. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I escaped that toxic environment. Age wasn't the significant factor. I vowed to be more cautious in choosing my next partner. On a happier note, after settling things with Jonathan, Laura invited me to her wedding. She introduced me to her long-term boyfriend, and I genuinely wished them both happiness. Finally, our dream of building a spacious new home had come to life, and my excitement overflowed as I envisioned the fresh chapter ahead of us. Just as we were about to celebrate this milestone, an unexpected twist threw everything into disarray. My in-laws arrived unannounced, their tone leaving no room for discussion as they announced, "We're moving in here," and requested that my parents vacate the property. I was taken aback, glancing at my husband for support, but all he could manage was a deep sigh followed by the words, "Please just do as they ask. Gently let your parents know." As I watched my in-laws eagerly unpack and settle into what was meant to be our new home, disbelief and frustration swirled within me. "Do you realize this is our house?" I asked, hoping they might grasp the misunderstanding. My name is Tiffany, and at 32, I've enjoyed a loving marriage with my husband Jesse for 4 wonderful years. While we don't have children yet, our life is filled with affection and mutual support. Recently, I have been increasingly concerned about my aging parents. Their declining mobility weighed heavily on my mind, prompting me to suggest that Jesse and I move in with them to provide care. Jesse agreed without hesitation, recognizing the dual benefits of our presence, supporting my parents while also granting us peace of mind. "It's a win-win situation," he had said, and I was grateful for his understanding. As we contemplated this plan, we faced logistical challenges. My family's home was quite far from the city, complicating our commutes, especially since neither of us drives. Relocating my parents to our small rental wasn't feasible either. It was already cramped for just the two of us, and considering future children would only worsen the space issue. In light of these challenges, I propose a bold solution. Why not build a new home that can accommodate everyone comfortably? Jesse's face lit up at the idea. "That's a fantastic idea," he exclaimed. Energized by his enthusiasm, we began planning and building a home that would suit all our needs. When I shared the news with my parents about our plan to build a house for everyone, they initially felt a pang of guilt for the inconvenience. However, once I explained our reasoning, their apprehension transformed into excitement, bringing me immense relief and joy. Later, Jesse and I visited a real estate agency to finalize the details of our project. We prioritized locations near hospitals for easy medical access for my parents and close to train stations to simplify our daily commutes. During discussions about the house specifics, I noticed my parents were still hesitant about the idea of moving in with us. Thankfully, Jesse offered several insightful suggestions that helped ease the planning process. As we progressed, our dream home began to take shape, and the excitement was palpable. After extensive discussions and considerable online research, we finalized our plans and were ready to consult builders. We were almost there, with the preparations coming together beautifully. I remarked on how building a home was turning out to be far more complicated than I had anticipated. Balancing this project with work was definitely slowing our progress, I said with a sigh. Absolutely, my husband added, reflecting on the challenges we face. We've put so much time and effort into these plans, but seeing the results now, it's been worth it. The blueprint we carefully crafted has exceeded all our expectations. We had consulted numerous real estate agents and spent countless hours on research to get to this point. Now, all that was left to do was wait eagerly for the completion of our dream home. It would take some time, but the excitement and anticipation were boundless. As the project advanced, my in-laws began to show more interest. "We heard you're building a new house. Is that right?" they asked one day. "Yes, that's correct. We're hoping to have it finished by the end of the year," I replied. "How wonderful. I'm so impressed with Jess's hard work and how he keeps us updated with all the details," my mother-in-law exclaimed, showing genuine enthusiasm for our endeavor. When she suddenly expressed interest in visiting soon, I was a little surprised but happily agreed. The following weekend, my husband and I made plans to visit their place. They greeted us with warm smiles, and the conversation quickly shifted to our home project. "Building a new house is such a joyous experience, isn't it?" my father-in-law remarked, his voice nostalgic as if recalling his own memories. "Yes, we're thrilled," I said. "We just hope the construction wraps up smoothly so we can move in as soon as possible." We all shared a laugh over the excitement of the journey ahead. My mother-in-law, curious, asked, "Could we see the blueprints?" My husband pulled out his phone and showed them a photo of the design. "Oh, it's quite spacious," she observed. "And so many rooms." "Yes," I nodded. "We'll be living with my parents, so we needed the extra space." I explained the situation, and both my in-laws looked at my husband in disbelief. "You're all moving in together?" they asked, their tone edged with surprise. "Yes," my husband confirmed. "Since my parents are getting older, we thought it would be best to live together, so we decided to build a new house." "Really? I see," they responded, their tone subtly shifting, revealing a hint of discomfort. Sensing the tension, I quickly changed the subject, hoping to ease the mood. "How have you both been? How's your health?" "We're doing well. No major changes. Just the usual routine," they replied, though it was clear their curiosity about our plans lingered. "Tell us more about the new house. Which room will your parents be using?" they asked. As my husband pointed to the blueprint and began explaining the layout, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. While he seemed oblivious to it, I could tell from their tense expressions that the news had unsettled them. Still, we continued discussing the house plans, hoping our shared excitement for this new chapter would eventually put everyone at ease. When my in-laws realized that my parents would be moving in with us, I felt a pang of guilt. I worried they might think we were giving my parents special treatment. Despite this, I hoped they would understand our decision, given my parents' age and needs. Yet it was becoming clear that they were finding it hard to accept. The construction of our new home was progressing smoothly, and with each visit, we could see it nearing completion. My husband often expressed his eagerness to move in quickly, but like him, I felt torn between the excitement of starting this new life and wanting everything to be perfect. Halfway through the construction, my parents came to see the progress. Their joy and gratitude filled me with a deep sense of relief and thankfulness that we could provide them with this new home. At the same time, I began to notice my husband had been visiting his parents more frequently, almost every weekend. "Are you planning to visit your parents again this weekend?" I asked him one evening. "Yeah, I am," he replied. I remarked on how often he had been visiting them since the start of the year, to which he responded, "I just want to show them my appreciation. That's why I've been making the effort to visit on my days off." I understood his intentions, recognizing that, like me, he was trying to balance the needs of both our families. I asked, should I come along? I was worried that his parents might feel left out or disappointed, perhaps even hoping they would be the ones moving in with us. I thought visiting them could be a nice gesture of goodwill. However, my husband reassured me, saying, "It's all right, I can handle it on my own." With that, he left for his parents' house. I decided to respect his choice and promised to support him whenever he needed it. Time flew by, and before we knew it, our new house was finally ready. On moving day, we loaded the car with boxes, bubbling with excitement as we set off to our new home, eager to start this new chapter together. As we pulled up, the sight of our house took my breath away. I couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow, our new home." It felt like the start of a brand new adventure. I found myself daydreaming about our life there, cooking meals while watching my husband play with our future child in the yard, or hosting family barbecues. These thoughts only heightened my excitement. Just then, my parents called. They were supposed to move in with us, but informed us they would be delayed due to traffic. They urged us to start settling in, but I insisted, "We'll wait for you." I planned to share this sentiment with my husband, but to my surprise, his parents showed up unexpectedly. I stared in disbelief as they got out of their car, all smiles, and approached us. "Look at this magnificent house. It's impressive enough to show off to our friends," they exclaimed. "Yes, it's the house that Jesse and I carefully planned," I replied, feeling a mix of pride and unease. "Tiffany, you have excellent taste," my mother-in-law complimented. "Well, I suppose," I replied, unsure of how to navigate this unexpected visit. "I can give her credit for that," I said, managing a thankful nod. To my astonishment, they began unloading a substantial amount of luggage from their car. Baffled, I quickly asked, "Mother-in-law, father-in-law, why do you have so much stuff? What are you planning to do?" Their reply completely caught me off guard. "What do you mean? We're moving our things into this house," they said. "You're planning to live here starting today?" I asked, my disbelief and frustration mounting. "Yes, but you'll need to ask your parents to leave," they continued. "Why are you doing this?" I inquired, my voice tinged with disbelief. My mother-in-law then explained, "As a new bride, it's customary to prioritize your husband's family." The unexpected twist left me struggling to reconcile the joy of our new beginning with the sudden challenge of balancing family expectations against our carefully laid plans. Feeling overwhelmed, I turned to my husband for support as his parents declared they should be the ones moving into the new house. Taking a deep breath, he said, "Just let your parents know gently." I felt a rush of disbelief. This house was intended for me and my parents. "I can't accept this decision," I protested. His response came with visible irritation. "Didn't my mom just explain that it's natural for a wife to prioritize her husband's family? We can address your parents' situation later." I was stunned. It was painfully clear that my husband was either heavily influenced by his parents or shared their views, which were now glaringly apparent. "Come on, help with the moving," he urged as his parents began unloading their belongings, despite the fact that my parents and I hadn't even set foot inside the house yet. "Oh, how wonderful. The interior is just splendid," they exclaimed, eagerly exploring the space. I confronted them. "Do you even know whose house this is?" They looked at me, clearly taken aback. After a brief pause, they turned to face me and asserted, "Whose house?" "Of course, it's Jess's house. Are you suggesting you have a claim to it?" I was taken aback by their confidence. "Since you and Jesse are living here and he's put so much into building this house, you have no right to make any claims without letting us explain first." It seemed my in-laws had jumped to conclusions and were quick to blame me, indicating that my husband hadn't shared the full details about our financial contributions to the house. "Why would your parents live in Jess's house in the first place?" they questioned. "Yes, it's strange. Poor Jesse having such a demanding wife and parents," they added scornfully. I reached my breaking point. Why am I being criticized for their misunderstandings? "If you intend to live here, then Jesse should compensate for the amount spent," I argued, feeling my frustration boil over. "I've contributed to this house," I asserted, facing their disbelief. "How much are you claiming to have paid? It must be a small amount, maybe $100, they mocked. My husband, looking uncomfortable, remained silent. I turned to him, challenging him. "Are you being honest? How high and mighty do you think you are?" He hesitated, unsure of what to say next. "What are you insinuating?" my mother-in-law demanded, her tone authoritative. Noticing my husband's reluctance to address the situation, I decided to clarify things once and for all. "I paid for this house entirely with my savings. If you plan to live here, I expect repayment of $460,000 for the cost of the house." My in-laws were visibly shocked, their mouths hanging open and their eyes wide with disbelief. They quickly turned to my husband for confirmation. "Jesse, is this true? Did Tiffany buy this house?" they asked, struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. My husband nodded slightly, affirming, "Yes, Tiffany bought the house. She was promoted recently and now earns more than I do." He then admitted something more personal. "Even though I've been working for a long time and graduated from a prestigious university, I made a significant mistake at work. I can't be promoted and even took a pay cut. Now I'm earning as much as a new employee." The room fell silent as they processed this news. They never imagined Jesse would be in such a situation. After a moment of stunned silence, their attitude toward me shifted dramatically. Tiffany, we're truly sorry for our earlier comments. We misunderstood everything. Please forgive us and let us stay in this house, they pleaded, their tone full of regret. My husband joined in, bowing deeply. Please, it's my fault for not telling you sooner. Let us stay here with you. Their sudden change in demeanor and plea for forgiveness left me completely taken aback, despite their apologies. I stood firm. No matter how much you plead, I can't accept this. I built this house to live with my parents. If that's not possible, there's no point in keeping it. If you want to live here, you'll need to pay me $460,000. We don't have that kind of money, they replied, their faces falling. Then it seems you'll need to find somewhere else to go, I said, resolute in my decision. Wait, they interjected. We sold our previous home and moved out. As my in-laws realized they could potentially be evicted from our new house, they became desperate. Tiffany, please let us stay. Your parents can live with us too, they pleaded. The thought of living under one roof with both sets of parents seemed unmanageable to me. I can't agree to that. If you sold your house, you must have some funds left. Why not use that to find a flat? Tears welled up in their eyes. The truth is, we lost a significant amount in a bad investment. The money from selling our house and our retirement savings went toward paying off that debt. We have nothing left. I'm retired, and my wife has been on the other side of this heavy door. I can only imagine what they're thinking. Perhaps they're questioning my sanity, feeling quite unsettled by my absence. But their concerns are lost on me, and I have no interest in seeking their approval. With a cheerful grin, I waved at the trio of anxious figures beyond the door and called out, "Good luck making your way back safely." My name is Karen, a 32-year-old newlywed. Not long ago, my husband and I celebrated our first anniversary, and while we haven't started a family yet, I cherish this chapter of our lives. Before tying the knot, I adored embarking on solo day trips by train whenever I had a free day. My friends often asked if I didn't feel lonely traveling alone, but I discovered a unique joy in wandering at my own pace, free from a strict itinerary. Though there was a hint of solitude, the thrill of exploration always outweighed it. I have a beloved travel magazine that I sometimes turn to for inspiration on my adventures. As my routine unfolded, I began to notice a curious coincidence. Wasn't that the same man I saw last week? It happened so frequently that one might call it fate, if they believed in such things. At first, it was a little unsettling, but it turned out he felt the same way. One day, he approached me hesitantly, saying, I'm sorry if I'm mistaken, but haven't we met before in different places? To break the awkwardness, I showed him my travel magazine and confidently explained that I was following one of its suggested trips. To my surprise, he revealed that he had the same magazine and smiled broadly. That's how I met Mason, my future husband. He was captivating with a carefree approach to travel, always packing light for his journeys while I tended to over-prepare. He joked, "With everything going cashless now, all you need is a mobile phone." Our conversation sparkled with excitement as we discovered our shared passion for travel. We exchanged contact details, and our solo trips gradually transformed into joint adventures. I delighted in the fact that sharing experiences made them even more memorable, and local delicacies tasted better when enjoyed with someone special. After about 8 months of dating, Mason proposed, and I couldn't have been happier. Just 8 months into our relationship, we made the joyful decision to marry, embarking on what I thought would be a blissful new chapter in our lives. However, this happiness was soon overshadowed by the presence of Mason's parents, Austin and Janet, who lived just a 25-minute drive away. Both in their 50s, with Janet working part-time while they remained active in the workforce, they initially visited our home quite often. However, over time, we found a comfortable balance with fewer visits. Our post-wedding life included regular trips to various tourist spots, continuing a tradition we both loved. Recently, Mason embraced a minimalist lifestyle, carrying only his mobile phone and leaving his wallet with me. "It feels so light, I hardly look ready to go out, do I?" he joked with a satisfied grin. I silently wished he would at least carry his wallet, but it was a minor inconvenience. Then one ordinary day took an unexpected turn when Mason casually suggested, "By the way, my parents' wedding anniversary is coming up. How about we invite them on our next trip?" I felt a sudden tightness in my chest at the suggestion, but I forced a smile and replied, Yes, that sounds great. We haven't seen Janet and Austin recently anyway. Mason, oblivious to my discomfort, didn't notice the strain in my expression. The next day, when I called his parents to extend the invitation, they were thrilled. I guess I have to give it my best shot, I thought, bracing myself. Honestly, I find it challenging to be around my in-laws. They aren't unpleasant people. We just don't seem to mesh well. I'm quite reserved and prefer calm environments, while they are the epitome of high energy, which can be overwhelming for me. The first time I met them, their boisterous enthusiasm took me by surprise. Nice to meet you. I'm Mason's mom, and this is his dad, they declared with the gusto of stand-up comedians, causing me to tense up involuntarily. Later, when the four of us, Mason, his parents, and I, went out for dinner, they chose the restaurant. I wondered if it was one of their favorite spots, given their enthusiastic choice. When we arrived, I was greeted by the sight of an all-you-can-eat buffet. The idea of meeting their son's girlfriend for the first time in such an informal setting made me chuckle to myself. We've been so anxious today that we haven't eaten anything since this morning, Janet exclaimed, her beaming smile seemingly immune to any nerves. That's right, we need to get our money's worth, Austin chimed in, revealing the true reason behind their skipped breakfast. Their loud voices drew discreet chuckles from other diners, making me feel a bit embarrassed and eager to leave. I glanced around, hoping Mason shared my discomfort, but to my surprise, he had already headed off to get food. Not to be outdone, his parents also jumped up, ready to load their plates as if preparing for a long winter's hibernation. Watching them, I couldn't help but wonder, can I really become a part of this family? I managed only a strained smile amid their boisterous energy, finding myself barely able to touch my food as I wrestled with doubts about my future with Mason. However, my apprehensions softened a bit when they affectionately remarked at the end of our meal, "What a wonderful girlfriend Mason has. He may be a bit awkward, but please take good care of him, Karen." Their sincere words warmed my heart. I loved Mason, and despite their overwhelming nature, I believed his parents meant well. When Mason proposed a few months later, I accepted without hesitation, convinced of our bond. Yet it turned out I wasn't as skilled at reading people as I thought. At our wedding, Mason's parents seemed to overlook the solemnity of the ceremony. Their attention instead focused on the buffet, much to my own parents' dismay. Mason's brother Brian appeared to be the only one aware of the awkwardness. "I'm sorry my parents showed such an embarrassing side," he confessed, his face flushed. "It's really shameful. I learned from Brian that he lives alone and has a somewhat strained relationship with our in-laws. They once complained, 'That boy is always so noisy with his complaints.' Just recently, he had boasted about buying several eggs despite a one-per-person limit, to which I had scolded him. 'Annoy,' he retorted. 'Don't you feel guilty about benefiting yourself at the expense of others?' Hearing that made me realize the complexities of our new family dynamics. I couldn't help but wonder, isn't that a fair point? What's wrong with expecting a little consideration? My thoughts were stirred by a recent visit from my in-laws, Janet and Austin, to our new home. They arrived empty-handed, which wasn't an issue, but soon began rummaging through our shelves. "Isn't this the snack they're advertising on TV? I've been dying to try it. Oh, and this one too." They treated my carefully chosen snacks as though they were on a scavenger hunt. Mason, ever so nonchalant, told them, "If you want them, take them home." "That's fine, right, Karen?" I wanted to express my frustration right then and there, but all I managed was a forced smile. It was becoming clear that my in-laws were quite the moochers, their constant casualness wearing me down. The demands of "I want this" and "give me that" wore me down in the early days of our marriage. They visited weekly, and each encounter left me feeling increasingly on edge. One day, I finally couldn't hold back my irritation any longer. "Mason, don't you think there's something off about Janet and Austin? They're kind of overbearing." My frustration boiled over into a full-blown argument, and Mason seemed genuinely perplexed by my anger. "No, not really. They've always been like this. Don't worry about it," he said, patting my shoulder. That only fueled my irritation further. "You kidding me? If this keeps up, I'll consider a divorce." My raised voice alarmed Mason, and he quickly intervened to put a stop to his parents' intrusive visits. Whatever he said to them worked, because our home life returned to a semblance of peace. However, the thought of traveling with them still made me anxious. On the day of the trip, I was taken aback to see them waiting, seemingly ready. "It's been a while," I heard you've been busy with work. It must be tough, Janet said, trying to make conversation. Despite her words, I was far from calm, especially when I noticed something odd. Janet and Austin, where's your luggage? On closer inspection, I realized they hadn't brought anything with them, not even for a day trip. Isn't it normal to bring at least a bag? I asked. We wanted to be ready to move quickly, they explained, leaving me bewildered and bracing for whatever might come next. As I complained about a sore shoulder, the response felt all too familiar and only added to my confusion. The trip unfolded just as disastrously as I had feared. Soon, it became clear that my in-laws had conveniently forgotten their wallets, feeding surprise with a casual, "That's strange, isn't it?" I watched them play innocent and my unease deepened. I found myself contemplating whether it would be better to cut the trip short or cancel it altogether. Unfortunately, my concerns fell on deaf ears. An exasperated Mason reassured me, "My folks have always been like this. I'll cover for them, but I'll make sure they pay me back." It seemed the trip would proceed as his parents laughed and offered hollow apologies. All I felt was disgust. Even after we arrived at our destination, their rudeness continued. At a store, they complained loudly about the lack of free samples, exclaiming, "Wow, stingy, huh?" When I bought a drink and hadn't even taken a sip, Janet asked, "Can I have a sip? I'm thirsty too. I can't believe I forgot my wallet." I forced a smile as Mason finally intervened, saying, "Stop it, it's embarrassing. Look, I'll buy you one." Overhearing this, Austin muttered under his breath, "What a stingy woman." I bristled at his lack of compassion, thinking bitterly, I could say the same about you. I should have walked away then, but my stubbornness kept me there. The pattern repeated itself 2 more times. After seemingly enjoying our first trip, Janet contacted Mason to plan another. When I saw them at the station platform again, a chill ran down my spine. This time, they remembered their wallets. But when it came time to pay, Austin exclaimed, "Oh no, this is the wallet I used before." I rushed out in such a hurry. Their blatant lie was something only Mason seemed willing to believe. On the 3rd trip, they forgot their wallets again. By then, it was clear their forgetfulness was intentional. I confronted Janet directly, asking, "Excuse me, but did you deliberately forget your wallet? You never intended to pay, did you?" My accusation made her face flush with anger, and Austin snapped back, "What a rude woman." Apologized to Janet. Fueled by long-held frustration, I stood my ground. "No way, both of you are just too greedy." Caught in the heated exchange, Mason appeared at a loss while curious tourists around us began to watch the spectacle. Noticing their gazes, Mason felt embarrassed and finally pleaded, "Stop it, please." Overwhelmed by the entire ordeal, I broke down in tears, feeling utterly disillusioned. As the confrontation reached its peak, the in-laws' reaction took an unexpected turn. Janet rushed over to a tearful Mason and, with Austin silently by her side, said, "I'm sorry, Mason. It was my fault. You're so kind to cry for me." I stood there, bewildered by their melodramatic response, my mind racing with one clear thought. This is impossible. All I could think was that I wanted a divorce as I watched tears stream down Mason's cheeks. Sensing the gravity of the situation, his parents lost their previously combative demeanor. "Karen, we know we're often in the wrong," they admitted. "It's Mason's money, but we've still taken advantage of him." Their repetition of "it's Mason's money" dripped with a sarcasm that revealed their lack of genuine remorse, confirming my suspicions that their forgetfulness about their wallets was intentional. Janet casually referred to Mason's money, oblivious to the fact that Mason and I both contributed to our finances. His salary was only slightly higher than mine, making our incomes nearly equal. Every outing with the in-laws recently had ended with them wanting something. "I want to buy this too. Maybe some gifts for the neighbors as well. What's that? Looks tasty. Hey Mason, buy that for me." Their endless demands had racked up shockingly high bills on Mason's credit card, and we had been living primarily off my salary for the past few months. At the time of our marriage, I had viewed our finances as shared, believing in spending within our means and not burdening each other. What infuriated me the most was Mason's reliance on cash during our travels. "What? Only cash here?" he exclaimed, pulling out his nearly empty wallet from my bag, which contained just a few coins. "No, I messed up. You know I don't carry cash," he said, devoid of malice. This still angered me, especially since I always covered my expenses. I couldn't help but feel that his parents thought I was freeloading off Mason's income while simply complaining. We split our living expenses, so their accusations were not only unfounded but deeply unpleasant. As I watched Mason cry, with Austin attempting to console him, I had a moment of introspection. "I'm sorry for being presumptuous," I finally said, deciding to diffuse the tension. "You guys go ahead on the train. I'll buy some drinks." Though reluctant, this decision was my attempt to restore some temporary peace. With a serene smile, I watched as Mason and the in-laws boarded the train. Their expressions shifted from happiness to panic when they realized I wasn't following. Sensing something amiss, Mason texted me, "Karen, are you coming? The train is about to leave." As the train doors began to close, I could see the panic etched on Mason's face. He seemed to be shouting something, but I was busy replying to his message. "I'm divorcing you. If your parents are so important to you, then live happily with them. Goodbye." I turned my back on Mason's frantic calls and texts, contemplating whether he even recognized the chaos he was causing on the train. Through the closing doors, his expression shifted from confusion to anger. "Hey, open this door. Are you crazy? I won't forgive you," he shouted, as if I needed his approval. I could see his parents yelling too, but their voices were drowned out in the noise of the train. Smiling at the bewildered trio, I muttered to myself, "Let's see if you make it back safely. Good luck." The train pulled away swiftly, vanishing from sight. As it departed, I felt a mix of relief and defiance. Knowing the next stop was quite a distance away, I hurried home to pack my things. I decided to stay with a friend while I figured out my next steps. Meanwhile, the barrage of messages from Mason continued until they abruptly stopped. His phone likely died. He often forgot to charge it overnight, and just that morning he mentioned it was at only 30%. Portable battery chargers are essential, he often said. Ironically, his essential charger was in my bag, along with his wallet. As I discussed my situation with my friend, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Brian, Mason's brother. "Karen, I'm sorry. Did something happen?" he asked. Brian explained that Mason's phone had run out of battery, and in his panic, he had dropped it, shattering the screen. Unable to contact me, the desperate in-laws turned to Brian. Instead of probing, he listened as I recounted everything about Mason and his parents, speaking without restraint. I could hear Brian's tone sharpen as I spoke. In the background, I caught snippets of the in-laws insisting that Brian, known for his articulate nature, would surely outmaneuver me in this argument. After I finished, Brian snapped, his voice taking on an authoritative edge. "Hey, you scoundrel. Are you stupid?" When Brian grew truly angry, his imposing demeanor surfaced. As the voice of reason, his words carried weight, and the in-laws' loud bickering echoed in the background. Choosing that moment, I quietly ended the call. Though Mason had initially been unsettled by the idea of divorce, my firm stance, communicated through a lawyer, led him to reluctantly accept the separation. Later, Brian confided that the in-laws had a notorious reputation, disliked not only by neighbors but also by those they had known in school. When Mason moved back to his parents' house, he quickly became the subject of local gossip, and now all three of them seldom ventured outside. Mason's colleagues, unsure how to address the rapid divorce, began to treat him cautiously, as if he were a sensitive topic. Finding some humor in the situation, Brian shared that the in-laws were infamous even at the local supermarket for their shameless antics, such as demanding discounts on nearly expired items or asking for freebies due to minor damages. He expressed his long-standing embarrassment and disdain for their behavior, noting that their actions were influenced by a gambling addiction, which explained their constant search for bargains and seemingly insatiable hunger. When people asked me about the reason for my divorce, I simply mentioned a fundamental difference in values. Tolerating such behavior would require an extraordinarily broad-minded person, something I realized I could not be. Since the divorce, I've continued my work and even taken on a side job as a freelance writer, inspired by the success of my travel blog, which caught the attention of a publisher. My passion for travel has seamlessly blended with my new writing assignments, and I've discovered that traveling solo suits me best. Last month, my writing earned me a decent income, enabling me to plan a vacation to a distant resort for some much-needed relaxation. At just 32 years old, I feel like my life is truly just beginning, filled with new possibilities and free from the turmoil that once clouded my happiness. Hi, I'm Gloria, a 36-year-old office worker balancing the ups and downs of daily life. My husband Matthew and I recently celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary, and almost immediately after we tied the knot, we became parents. Our daughter, the brightest part of our lives, is about to turn 8. Over the years, there have been some challenging moments in our marriage, but the joy our daughter brings to our lives is irreplaceable. And on the whole, I find happiness in our family dynamic. That said, like any family, we have our struggles, and for me, one area of tension lies in the way we handle finances. Matthew has a strong passion for his hobbies, and while he doesn't go overboard, he often spends a sizable portion of his income on them. I've always stressed the importance of him contributing a fixed minimum to our household expenses, funds that cover the essentials like utilities and groceries. But since his contributions only cover the basics, I find myself constantly working to tighten our budget elsewhere. My salary goes towards rent, our daughter's school fees, and saving for her future education, and this constant juggling of finances adds a lot of stress to my life. Another source of strain comes from the uneven division of household labor. Despite both of us working full-time, Matthew rarely helps with the chores. I've brought it up countless times, hoping for a more balanced approach to maintaining the house. Juggling work, finances, and home upkeep is exhausting, and I often wish the responsibilities were shared more fairly. Despite this, I stay positive, focusing on creating a warm, nurturing environment for our daughter. As she grows, I hope we can show her the importance of teamwork and responsibility, making adjustments as we go to better support each other. It's not a perfect situation, but I'm committed to making the best of it. When I ask Matthew to help around the house, his go-to excuse is that the tasks would take him too long, and it's easier for me to handle them myself. Over time, I've taken on all the household responsibilities alone. We had our daughter soon after getting married, but Matthew was often absent when it came to her upbringing. He expressed concerns about accidentally hurting her, which meant I carried most of the parenting load. As the years went by, my dissatisfaction with him grew, but we had been together for 8 years and had a growing child. I wasn't sure if initiating a divorce when our daughter was approaching puberty was the right decision. I told myself that maybe it was normal for couples to feel disconnected after many years together and that no family was without its flaws. But a recent incident with my sister-in-law made me seriously reconsider our marriage. One day, she showed up at our door looking visibly distressed. "Gloria, I'm sorry, but I need to stay here for a bit. There's been an issue with Ryan," she said, clearly upset. I was worried and asked if something had happened with her husband. She hesitated and tried to change the subject, which left me feeling uneasy and desperate for more information. Later that night, when Matthew returned from work and we had put our daughter to bed, we all sat down to talk. "So, what happened?" I asked, looking at my sister-in-law. I asked her what had happened, and she hesitated before replying. "Well, Ryan just snapped. He said, out of nowhere, that he wants a divorce." I was stunned. I had always thought of Ryan as a calm, stable, and sincere person, so this sudden outburst didn't make sense. I pressed her for more details, asking, "Why did he get so angry?" She seemed defensive, her voice rising with panic. "Why are you asking me that?" she retorted. A thought crossed my mind. Perhaps she had done something to provoke him. Her avoidance only fueled my concern. "What do you mean? Why am I asking?" I responded. "Why are you defending him? Are you involved with him or something?" Her accusation caught me off guard, but I quickly denied it. "Of course not," I said. "I'm not involved with Ryan." Matthew, overhearing the exchange, laughed off her suggestion. "That's impossible," he said. "She barely has time for anything outside of her responsibilities. And besides, she always leaves her phone out in the open." Despite my husband's defense, frustration bubbled inside me. My life was a constant whirlwind of work, household chores, and caring for our daughter. After long days, I barely had the energy to check my phone, let alone engage in anything like an affair. Still, my sister-in-law insisted she didn't know why Ryan was upset. We agreed it would be best to talk directly to him to clear things up. A little later, Ryan arrived at our house. My sister-in-law, still uneasy, decided to step out and give us some space. Ryan, looking apologetic, expressed regret over the turmoil he'd caused. "I'm really sorry for all the trouble," he said earnestly, his calm demeanor confirming my belief that he wasn't the type to make rash decisions. "Ryan, I just don't understand," I said, pressing him. "You've only been married for a year. Isn't asking for a divorce a bit extreme? There has to be a reason." Ryan took a deep breath before revealing the shocking truth. "The reason is that she spent all of my savings, $110,000, without telling me." I felt the air leave the room. You saved $110,000 and it's all gone in just 1 year, I said, my voice betraying my disbelief. That's about $5,500 every month. How did that happen? Ryan explained that he had been carefully managing their finances, allocating just enough from his monthly income to cover all their living expenses. The entire $110,000 had been spent entirely on non-essential personal expenses, luxuries, and entertainment. No wonder you're upset, I said, empathizing with him. Anyone would be furious in your shoes. I couldn't help but think of my own situation with Matthew's tendency to overspend. It was almost as if this was a family trait. With the revelation of the massive financial strain, I suggested, if she doesn't make an effort to repay that $110,000, maybe you should seriously think about separating, especially since there are no kids involved. Ryan nodded, taking my advice to heart, but then Matthew surprised me by chiming in. I'll make sure my sister pays you back, he said confidently. I was taken aback by his sudden certainty. How could he be so sure? Ryan looked at him, clearly appreciative of the support. I would appreciate that, thank you. With that, we had reached what seemed like a tentative resolution, though I knew the situation was far from over. As Ryan left, my sister-in-law returned to the house, the weight of everything still hanging in the air. I confronted her immediately. Ryan mentioned that you used up all of his savings, $110,000. She quickly became defensive. I used it for living expenses, she retorted, her tone sharp. I tried to explain the situation, but she wouldn't hear it. Ryan had already made it clear that he kept a separate account for everyday expenses. Her reply was dismissive, almost scornful. You don't know anything, so just shut up. Her harsh tone wasn't a surprise. She often belittled me during our conversations. But this time, her complete lack of remorse, coupled with her dismissive attitude toward the mess she created, made it all too clear. Ryan might truly be better off pursuing a divorce. She refused to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done, and there was no indication that she planned to fix anything. It painted a grim picture for the future of their marriage. During our heated exchange, Ryan mentioned that he might consider forgiving her if she repaid the full $110,000. My sister-in-law, seemingly cornered by her own actions, lamented, "How can I pay back that much? I'm just a housewife." I responded firmly, "If you can't pay it back, you shouldn't have spent his money in the first place." The tension in the room thickened, and then, almost as if she had an epiphany, my sister-in-law turned to me with a gleam of hope in her eye. "Relax, Gloria. We've got money, right? You've got $220,000 saved up. So no worries, right?" she said, sounding almost victorious, as if she found a miraculous solution. I was thrown off completely. "Wait a minute. How do you even know about my savings, Matthew?" I asked, stunned. I had never shared that I'd saved that amount for our daughter's future tuition. Matthew, appearing unfazed, casually admitted, "I found it when I went through your parents' house. It was in the second drawer of the closet in your room." I was speechless. "You went through my things without asking. That's unbelievable. We're married, but that doesn't mean my personal belongings are up for inspection," I protested, feeling utterly betrayed. Ignoring my outrage, Matthew continued, "Your sister-in-law is in trouble. Give us your savings to help her out." I was incredulous. "I'm not handing over that money. It's for our daughter's future. If you think $110,000 should just be given away, why don't you figure out a way to pay her back?" Matthew didn't hesitate. He reached into a drawer and pulled out divorce papers. "I had these ready just in case something like this happened," he said coldly, as if he'd been preparing for this moment all along. My frustration boiled over. "You've got some nerve trying to manipulate the situation like this," I snapped. "That's exactly what I've been wanting to say to you," I added, my voice shaking with the weight of my anger. Then, with chilling finality, Matthew filled out the papers and said, "I'm serious. We can get a divorce anytime you want." To my shock, my sister-in-law, watching the drama unfold with an almost gleeful grin, piped up. "Well, I'll be one of your witnesses," she said, scribbling her name on the form as if she were signing a trivial document. "You can either pay me the $110,000 or we can get a divorce," Matthew threatened, as though he were cornering me into a choice. I was astounded by their boldness and manipulative tactics. But rather than giving them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their words cut, I feigned compliance, allowing the moment to pass without escalating things further. The next day, I prepared myself for whatever came next. I decided to take control of the situation and invited some important figures, my in-laws and Ryan, to our home. When they arrived, Matthew was immediately baffled. "Ryan, why are you here?" "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" he asked, his confusion palpable. Before Matthew could say anything more, his father interjected, his voice calm but firm. "Matthew, don't embarrass yourself any further." He then turned to me and added, "Gloria, I'm truly sorry about my son and daughter's foolish behavior." Ryan also spoke up, his tone sincere. "I must apologize too, Gloria," he said. Their apologies were like a bombshell, but the tension didn't subside. Matthew, still bristling, tried to assert himself. "Why are you two apologizing? You should be quiet." Ignoring him, his father continued. "We went through your room, Matthew, and we found stacks of expensive bags and jewelry." His mother added, "Ryan asked us to look into it, and it's clear you've had a habit of hiding expensive purchases from us since you were young." The revelations hit like a ton of bricks, and Matthew's deceit became undeniable. His mother, facing the mounting evidence, finally said, "I can't stay married to you anymore." The tide had turned dramatically. The extent of Matthew's financial misconduct had been exposed, and my earlier concerns now seemed justified in an entirely new light. The situation took another turn when it came out that my sister-in-law had falsely claimed she used the $110,000 for living expenses. "I want you to pay me back the $110,000, Ryan demanded firmly, to everyone's shock, especially Matthew's. "I've already taken steps," Ryan continued. "Matthew, you're getting a divorce too." Gloria already filled out the divorce papers, and I signed as a witness. We just submitted them together. My sister-in-law's declaration was defiant. Matthew was furious. "I won't allow that," he exclaimed. I couldn't hold back my frustration. "You won't allow it? What are you talking about? You're the one who's been threatening divorce and trying to make Gloria, who has nothing to do with your sister's debts, take responsibility for everything. You are despicable. Gloria is my wife, not your property." I shot back. "She wasn't born into your family. She's essentially a stranger to you. You should show her more respect and care." Ryan chimed in, his voice steady. "I'm with Gloria on this. You're completely out of line." Faced with such a direct and reasonable argument from my parents-in-law, Matthew was left speechless, his head lowered in shame. My sister-in-law, visibly shaken, stood by silently, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Thankfully, my parents-in-law helped steer the conversation, assisting both Ryan and me in navigating through the divorce without further complications. In an attempt to make amends, my sister-in-law sold off as many luxury goods as she could, raising about $45,000 to repay Ryan. The remaining $30,000 was covered by my parents-in-law, who would now closely supervise her repayment of the debt. This arrangement brought some balance and ensured she would be held accountable for her actions, while allowing Ryan and me to move forward and start fresh. After the divorce, my sister-in-law found herself in a difficult financial position. She now works tirelessly from dawn till dusk, struggling to pay off the debt she incurred from mismanaging her former husband's savings. Her days are long and exhausting, leaving little room for rest. As for my ex-husband, the divorce forced him to make some significant changes. I arranged for him to provide child support, which he has been able to pay consistently despite his circumstances. However, I've heard through the grapevine that he continues to live alone in a modest apartment. His salary, though decent, is stretched thin by his rent, living expenses, and child support payments. Eventually, the financial strain forced him to move to a cheaper apartment. Sadly, his long-standing habit of unnecessary spending hasn't helped, and despite living in a more affordable place, he often finds himself broke, with no savings to fall back on. This financial instability will likely make it difficult for him to enter another relationship anytime soon. Meanwhile, I've returned to my parents' home with my daughter. Being back under their roof has helped stabilize our lives, allowing me to focus on the future. My parents have been incredibly supportive, especially in helping with childcare while I work. This support has been crucial in allowing me to regain my footing after the divorce. I'm working hard, not just to meet our day-to-day needs, but also to save for my daughter's future. I want her to have every opportunity to pursue her dreams without financial constraints. This is a new chapter for us, and I'm determined to make it a successful one. I plan to continue sharing our journey, hoping that our story might inspire or help others facing similar situations. If you find our story engaging and want to follow our journey through this new phase of our lives, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means so much to me, and I look forward to connecting with you in future videos. Thank you for watching. As an architect, I was used to designing spaces, crafting structures to embody harmony and purpose. But here I was unexpectedly in the role of a bride, envisioning my wedding as the most meticulously crafted day of my life. Each detail, from the floral arrangements to the curated playlists, had been planned down to perfection. In my mind, it would unfold like a scene from a romance novel, a celebration where love triumphs over all. My fiancé, Tyler, an engineer with a logical mind that perfectly complemented my creativity, waited for me at the altar. His usual steady smile seemed tense, as if he was carrying an invisible weight. As I walked in the aisle, a sense of unease crept over me. Tyler's gaze held a distance, a look I tried to dismiss as wedding jitters. Then, I caught sight of his mother, Betty, whispering to a guest, her face tinged with a hint of disapproval. When our eyes met, she forced a smile, mouthing, "You look beautiful," though her eyes betrayed her insincerity. My heart sank, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the moment. During the ceremony, when the pastor asked Tyler if he would take me as his wife, he paused. The words "I do" finally came, yet his eyes lacked the warmth I'd always felt from him. In the ring exchange, Betty abruptly stood up, announcing she needed to capture the moment. Her tone felt more cautionary than celebratory. Later, at the reception, she made a remark about my unconventional dress, hinting I was defying tradition. I laughed it off, replying that I saw our wedding as a celebration of love, not of strict customs. Tyler tried to smooth things over, but his words felt heavy, as if carrying a weight of resignation. As we danced our first dance, our bodies were close, yet our spirits felt miles apart. The song that was meant to symbolize our love now seemed like a hollow echo, and when Tyler whispered, "Are you ready for forever?" the vastness between us felt overwhelming. I replied, trying to shake the dark cloud lingering over us. But deep down, I sensed something had already shifted, even as friends and family toasted to our new beginning. When we returned to our cozy home, the place I had once envisioned as our sanctuary, it felt strangely foreboding. The walls that I thought would safeguard our happiness now seemed like the bars of a cage, foreshadowing an uncertain future. Soon after, Betty began her subtle but steady invasion, showing up unannounced, her criticisms filling the spaces I had hoped to keep peaceful. One day, without warning, Betty declared that she would be moving in indefinitely, claiming my cherished reading nook as her own. Shocked, I pulled Tyler aside, my voice trembling. "Tyler, this is our home. Shouldn't we discuss something this big together?" He met my gaze, but the warmth I had once known was gone. "Mom's getting older," he said. "She shouldn't be alone. She needs to be with family." "So, I'm not family." The words escaped before I could stop them, my voice laced with hurt. "That's not what I meant," he replied, his frustration rising. "Mom has done so much for me. I owe her this." "What about what we owe each other?" I pleaded. "We just got married. This should be our time to build something together." But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The decision had already been made. Betty moved in, and the love that was supposed to fill our home was replaced with tension and resentment. Every corner I once found peace in felt heavy, occupied by her constant presence. The moments of warmth I dreamed of were slowly replaced by a sense of suffocation, and each day felt like a new challenge in a house that no longer felt like home. I used to share everything with Tyler, but now I found myself not just fighting to save my marriage or reclaim my home, but battling to preserve my identity, dignity, and peace of mind. The question kept echoing in my mind: how did it come to this? How did my life, my choices, become secondary to someone else's whims? What used to be my peaceful reading nook had transformed into a cluttered space filled with Betty's belongings. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and creativity, became a battleground for her constant critiques. And Tyler, the man I thought I'd grow old with, now seemed like a stranger, aligned with the opposition. This was only the beginning. If I thought life had been tough before, I had no idea what was coming. The atmosphere at home grew stifling, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Amid this escalating tension, I found myself staring at 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test in my trembling hands. It should have been a moment of joy, a milestone to celebrate, but under the weight of everything, the news of my first pregnancy felt more like an additional burden than a blessing. Standing before the bathroom mirror, my eyes red from holding back tears, I realized that this should have been a moment of excitement. But it had become a heavy weight I wasn't ready for. When I shared the news with Tyler, his reaction was disappointing in its indifference. "Well, that's something," he muttered, barely looking up from his phone before quickly shifting the conversation to some home improvement idea his mother had suggested. Betty, however, embraced my pregnancy as though it were her divine calling. She began to dictate every aspect of my life: what I ate, what I did, and even where I should give birth. Her interference didn't stop with advice. She turned my pregnancy into another arena for her to assert control. "You're eating again," she would remark, eyeing the modest sandwich I prepared. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy?" I tried to remain calm. "This is doctor-recommended, Betty." She scoffed. "Doctors these days don't know anything. Back in my day, we knew how to manage pregnancies." As the weeks went on, my energy dwindled, but Betty's demands only escalated. She transformed my home into her kingdom, where I was expected to cook, clean, and cater to her every whim, as though I were a servant, not a pregnant daughter-in-law. "Betty, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" she barked from her self-appointed throne in what used to be my cherished reading nook, now turned into her lair for endless phone scrolling and daytime TV marathons. "I've been feeling really tired today, Betty. The doctor advised me to take it easy," I replied, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Tiredness during pregnancy isn't an illness, you know," she shot back, her words cold and dismissive. Through all of this, Tyler's silence was deafening. His passive compliance only added fuel to the growing tension. Things finally boiled over during a tense dinner when Betty criticized my choice of baby names. "That's a ridiculous name for a child," she sneered. "You might as well pin a kick me sign on his back for his entire school life." At my breaking point, I snapped. "Enough is enough, Betty. This is my child, and I have a say in how to raise him or her." Her eyes flared with anger, and her voice escalated. Tyler, as always, intervened, not in my favor. "Mom, you're being emotional. She's just giving her opinion," he said, looking between Betty and me, then around the house, which had become my prison. I felt trapped, humiliated, isolated. The reflection in my tarnished wedding ring showed a woman I barely recognized, someone who was losing everything that once defined her. My home, my dignity, and my relentless spirit had all been slowly eroded under the weight of constant conflict. During one of these heated family discussions, Betty, with a cold, triumphant tone, looked me dead in the eyes and declared, "If you can't handle a simple family discussion, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family." Tyler's silence in that moment was more cutting than any harsh words. It sliced through me, leaving me with a deep, aching emptiness. I realized then that my nightmare wasn't looming on the horizon. It had already consumed me, turning my life into a maze of broken dreams and suffocated cries. I wandered through the house like a ghost, each room echoing with the absence of the warmth they once held. The baby growing inside me became my only beacon of hope, the last bit of joy in a life that was quickly becoming hollow. But even that small solace was under threat. The breaking point came on a cold evening. During one of the dreadful family dinners thick with tension, I had spent hours preparing the meal, bracing myself for Betty's inevitable criticisms. Each of her jabs felt like a sharp sting, each scoff like a slap to the face. I'd grown used to it, but this time her words hit deeper than ever. "You think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" she sneered, each word aimed like a piercing attack at my already fragile self-esteem. My hands shook, and tears blurred my vision, but before I could respond, Tyler added to my despair. "Mom has a point. Betty's right, you need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was the last straw. A surge of anger, mixed with years of resentment and humiliation, rushed through me. "Step it up. Step it up," I exclaimed, my voice rising with a fierce intensity I hadn't expected. "I am carrying our child, managing our home, and enduring relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you're telling me to step it up." Both Tyler and Betty looked stunned by the force of my outburst. In that moment, the reality of my situation hit me full force. The profound isolation, the deep disrespect. It was all laid bare, unyielding, and stark. Every day, I faced the unbearable tension within what was supposed to be the sanctuary of my own home. It had built up like a dormant volcano, simmering beneath the surface until it finally erupted. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice breaking under the weight of it all. I won't raise my child in a place where their mother is treated like nothing. If this is what family is to you, then I want no part of it." With those words, I stood up from the dinner table, leaving Tyler and Betty in stunned silence. I quickly packed a small bag, my hands shaking so violently that I struggled with the simple task of turning the doorknob. It was then that Betty, sensing her last chance to strike, decided to deliver what she thought would be the final blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Tyler's house, not yours," she sneered. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. "Actually, Betty, this house is mine. I bought it, and I have every right to decide who stays and who leaves." "Don't do this. Let's talk about it," Tyler pleaded, his voice desperate, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, tears streaming down my face as I opened the door to the cold night outside. As I stepped out into the night, I felt the finality of the moment settle in. The door closing behind me felt like the end of a long, tragic chapter in my life. I started walking, each step away from that house a painful, necessary one. I didn't know where I was headed, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of agency over my own fate. Despite the emotional toll, the icy wind cut through my thin clothes, biting into my skin as sharply as the turmoil inside me. I walked aimlessly, lost in a haze of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, until I neared my parents' house, a sanctuary I desperately needed. Just steps away from safety, my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement, sending me crashing to the ground. My ankle twisted painfully, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional agony I had been enduring. Limping and tearful, I finally reached my parents' doorstep. Their shocked expressions as they opened the door reflected the gravity of what had happened. This breakdown had been a long overdue fracture in a life already strained by too much pressure. As they hurried me to the hospital, I knew deep down that things couldn't go back to the way they were. I couldn't return to that house, not to Tyler, and certainly not to the oppressive shadow of Betty that had suffocated me for so long. Reaching my breaking point wasn't just the end. It marked the beginning of something new, a harsh but necessary step toward regaining the life that had been slowly stripped away from me. In the sterile hospital room, surrounded by the constant beeping of machines and the cold, unfeeling walls, reality hit hard. My sprained ankle propped up and undergoing checks for any complications from the fall, I experienced a strange blend of relief and fear. My parents stood beside me, their faces etched with concern and quiet anger. They had always sensed something was wrong in my marriage, but now the full extent of its dysfunction was glaringly obvious. "Sweetheart, what are you going to do now?" my mom asked, breaking the heavy silence, her voice heavy with worry. "I don't know, Mom," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil still swirling inside me. "But what I do know is that I can't go back. Not now, not ever." My dad, who had been pacing the room, paused and turned to face me. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make," he said, his voice calm yet heavy with concern. "But you need to think about your future, and the future of your child." I nodded, my mind a labyrinth of uncertainty, filled with countless possible paths, each shadowed by doubt, but also touched by the promise of something new, something free. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. "Betty, where are you? We need to talk." Without a second thought, I turned off my phone. Whatever Tyler had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done with words. Now, it was time for action. My first decisive step was to pick up the phone and call a family lawyer. With my parents beside me, we laid out the details of divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was something clinical, even cold, about turning the end of a marriage into legal documents. But it also gave me a sense of power, control over a future I had almost forgotten I could choose for myself. For the first time, I was taking charge of my life, prioritizing my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Tyler and Betty were served with divorce papers. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about reclaiming my independence, about forging a future where I could breathe freely, unencumbered by the shadows of a toxic relationship. Along with the divorce papers, my lawyer filed a notice of eviction against Tyler and Betty from the house that was legally mine. It was a bold move, but necessary. The paperwork also included demands for child support and compensation for the emotional toll I had endured. It was severe, but it was a firm severance of the toxic ties that had held me captive for far too long. When I finally turned my phone back on, it was flooded with messages and missed calls from Tyler. Betty, please can we talk about this? I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I'm sorry, Betty. I never wanted any of this to happen. Let's find a way to make it right. For a moment, I hesitated. I was tempted to reply, to hear him out. But then memories of all those nights filled with humiliation, years of emotional neglect, and Betty's ceaseless cruelty came rushing back. Any affection I had once felt for him was buried under the rubble of our shattered marriage. Without another thought, I deleted the messages, erased his number, and blocked him on every social media platform. As far as I was concerned, Tyler was now a chapter of my past, one I was finally ready to close. I knew the road ahead would be hard. Divorce proceedings are never simple, especially when children are involved. But for the first time in ages, I felt a sense of control. The journey ahead would be painful, yes, but it would also be mine to navigate. The darkness was finally behind me, and though the future was uncertain, it held the promise of something better. The courtroom was sterile and cold, its atmosphere heavy with finality. My lawyer sat beside me, exuding calm confidence. Behind me, my parents' support was unwavering. Across the room, Tyler sat, looking defeated, his face a mask of bewilderment. Betty stood beside him, her expression one of indignant disbelief. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Anthony entered. The proceedings unfolded quickly, like a storm on leaves. Lies were exposed, facts and accusations laid bare. Evidence of Betty's emotional abuse and Tyler's neglect was presented. I watched their faces, twisted with shock and perhaps regret, as they saw themselves through the eyes of the law for the first time. The judge turned to Betty. "Miss, you stayed accused of emotional abuse and harassment. The evidence against you is overwhelming. How do you plead?" Betty faltered, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Your Honor, this has all been taken out of context. I was merely looking out for my son's well-being." The judge, unimpressed, retorted, "It appears your definition of well-being is quite twisted." After a brief but intense deliberation, Judge Anthony rendered the verdict. "The court hereby grants Betty a full divorce from Tyler. Custody of the unborn child will be awarded solely to Betty. Tyler, you are required to pay child support as determined by the state. Mrs. Betty, given the evidence of your emotional abuse and harassment, you are fined $300,000 for your actions." A wave of relief washed over me as the gavel came down. But it was a bittersweet victory. My marriage had ended not in dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet shuffle of legal documents. I was free, but the cost was higher than I had ever imagined. As we exited the courtroom, Tyler approached me, his expression full of confusion and regret. "Betty, I'm so sorry. I never thought we'd end up here." I looked at him, this man I had once believed I would spend my entire life with, and felt nothing but an empty void where love had once resided. "I didn't think so either, Tyler, but here we are. It's too late for apologies now." I turned my back on him and walked away. Betty tried to catch my eye as I passed, perhaps seeking some form of recognition or even forgiveness. But I offered her nothing. She had drained me, and I couldn't afford to give her the satisfaction of knowing she still had any effect on me. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the world felt different, brighter, more vivid, as if I was seeing everything through a new lens. The weight that had held me down for so long had finally been lifted. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write on my own terms. My mother embraced me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Betty. You're free." I hugged her back, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I couldn't have gone through this without you and Dad." Together, we walked into the light of a new day, ready to start fresh, free from the shadows of the past. "We'll always be here for you," my dad said, joining in the hug, his voice steady and reassuring. "And for your new beginning." That evening, I sat alone in the quiet of my house, the house that was now undeniably mine. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't lonely, I was alone, and that was enough. The only expectations I needed to meet were my own. A flicker of apprehension remained, of course. I was about to become a single mother, a responsibility that loomed large. But as I rested my hand on my belly, feeling the gentle movements of my unborn child, a sense of calm settled over me. This painful journey had led me to a reckoning, but it had also brought me to a place of survival. The scars from my past remained, but they now told a story of strength, not defeat. I was ready for whatever the future held, not out of necessity, but from a place of choice. And that choice, to steer my own life, to shape my destiny, made all the difference. This was the promise of a new chapter, one written with hope, resilience, and newfound freedom. My husband had all but abandoned his responsibilities, leaving me to shoulder the overwhelming burden of caring for his ailing father and managing every household chore. Each night, he stayed out until the early hours, barely contributing enough for our living expenses. Though I cherished my career as a nurse, I had resigned from my job to dedicate myself entirely to his father's care. Now, here he was again, asking me for more money. "We can't make ends meet on this amount," I told him. "It's your responsibility to manage our finances within the budget, but there's a limit. How can you expect more from me when you contribute nothing and disregard everything I'm doing?" Aloof and condescending, he shot back, "All you do is drain our finances without contributing. You're like a parasite." "How dare you say that?" I retorted. "If I left, you wouldn't last a day. Maybe you should be trying to keep me instead of threatening me." In response, he waved a set of divorce papers in my face, arrogantly declaring he was ready to end our marriage at any time. Tossing the papers at me, he stormed out of the room. I gathered them from the floor, spreading them out before me. A wry smile crossed my face when I read the title, "Petition for Divorce." If he thought I'd be devastated, he was mistaken. I was already prepared, having imagined a life beyond his shadow long ago. With a mix of pity and determination, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "My name is Kayla. I was once a nurse at a private hospital, a challenging job with long hours, but it was my calling. Caring for others brought me deep fulfillment. Now, it was time to reclaim the life I had put on hold. At first, my marriage to Vincent was smooth, despite our busy schedules keeping us apart. But things changed drastically when his father, his only living family member, suffered a severe health crisis. Unable to live alone, he needed constant care. Vincent, concerned for his father, asked if I could step in, promising to make up for my lost income by working harder and taking on more responsibilities at home. Reluctant yet understanding, I agreed. I'd always had a good relationship with my father-in-law, a kind and generous man. We moved in with him, and at first, Vincent seemed committed to helping out. We tightened our finances, but we managed. Yet as the months went on, Vincent's promises faded, and he gradually withdrew. He reduced his financial support, became increasingly absent, and left me alone to juggle the household and caregiving duties. With my job gone, our income was halved, and the financial strain grew with every passing day. I found myself balancing the demands of caring for my father-in-law with searching for affordable groceries, often driving long distances just to save a few dollars. Meals became simpler, especially when Vincent wasn't around. Our living arrangement, which once felt manageable, now seemed increasingly unsustainable. Vincent had become entirely detached, spending his earnings freely and leaving all our challenges on my shoulders. Life grew incredibly difficult as I stretched every dollar to its limit. New clothes, trips to the hairdresser, simple luxuries were no longer an option. When the financial strain became unbearable, I approached Vincent for help. "About this month's expenses," I started. "I already gave you the money," he interrupted sharply. "Yes, but it's less than last month," I explained. "I can't make ends meet with this." "Are you kidding me? Managing the budget is your job," he snapped. "But the budget is too tight. Ever since I quit my job, it's been a constant struggle," I pleaded. "Please, we need more for the household." He scoffed. "It's my hard-earned money. I'll spend it how I want. Just because you were a nurse, you think you're important. Now you're not contributing financially at all. You're just a parasite living off my earnings. So keep quiet and do as I say." His harsh words stung, and his attitude only grew colder each time I tried to bring up our finances. With no other option, I began dipping into my savings for my nursing days. Each month became a battle as I juggled our worsening financial situation and endured Vincent's verbal abuse. Yet in all this hardship, my father-in-law was a bright spot. Despite his own struggles, he was endlessly grateful for even the smallest gestures of care. Aware of our financial strain, he even offered his pension to help. He was a kind soul and became my one source of emotional support. His gratitude and gentle presence gave me the strength to keep going, holding on to his warmth and appreciation when everything felt bleak. But my moments of peace were tragically short-lived. Nearly 3 years into caring for him, my father-in-law passed away unexpectedly. That day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a profound change in my life. I drove a bit further than usual to the supermarket to take advantage of a special sale. Though I felt uneasy about leaving him alone, he reassured me with a gentle smile and encouraged me not to worry. His warmth and calm words eased my mind, and I left, feeling peaceful, believing he was all right. Tragically, while I was away, he collapsed, and he never recovered. The guilt of not being there haunted me. I replayed that decision to leave him alone over and over, and the tears wouldn't stop. Despite the overwhelming grief, I knew I couldn't live in regret forever. I needed to focus on arranging his funeral. Vincent assumed the role of chief mourner but was more concerned with appearances than actual responsibilities, leaving most of the preparations to me. Given the deep support my father-in-law had offered me, I preferred handling the arrangements myself rather than risk Vincent's neglect. Throwing myself into the funeral planning became a temporary escape from the sorrow. The process was grueling, leaving me feeling drained, but it helped pull me out of my depression, if only for moments. While Vincent barked orders 1 minute and watched TV the next, I focused on honoring my father-in-law's memory. At the funeral, many attendees extended their condolences to Vincent, unaware of the reality behind our struggles. They assumed he had been the primary caregiver, saying things like, "It must have been hard to prepare everything so quickly, and you took really good care of him. He was lucky to have such a devoted son." Their well-meaning words stung. Knowing the truth, I kept my composure, responding gracefully despite feeling exhausted. "It wasn't hard at all," I would reply, masking the truth. "He was like a father to me too, so I did my best for him." I held on to the belief that my care had brought him some comfort in his final years, hoping he'd found peace. Vincent mingled with the guests, flashing a practiced smile and exchanging pleasantries. His friendly facade grated on me, as I knew he had done nothing to prepare for the funeral or to care for his father in his last days. Beneath his superficial charm, the truth remained hidden, leaving me to carry the weight of both sorrow and responsibility alone. I vividly recalled the sadness in my father-in-law's eyes on the nights Vincent would come home late, never bothering to speak a word to him. Now that he was gone, Vincent's pretense of being a devoted son was almost unbearable. My disgust for him grew with each passing day, and it was difficult to shake off, even after the funeral. With my father-in-law no longer here, the one thing that had kept me tolerating our strained marriage was gone. The thought of divorce increasingly crept into my mind, but I was torn. I felt both repelled by him and uncertain about making such a huge decision. I kept procrastinating, held back by the remnants of a life that once held meaning. The routine was all that kept me going. But then, one unexpected incident gave me clarity. One evening, I went to the local supermarket, only to find they were out of a seasoning I needed. Deciding to try a store a bit farther away, I made my purchase and headed outside. That's when I saw Vincent, who was supposed to be at work. Curious and cautious, I kept my distance, watching him. He seemed nervous, glancing around before entering a building with a sign for a consumer finance company hanging above the door, one I recognized but never expected to be involved with us. A chill ran through me, as if I had been plunged into icy water. My whole body reacted, but my mind remained eerily calm, piecing everything together. It dawned on me that not only was Vincent failing to provide enough for our household, but his actions were now leading him into serious financial trouble, without my knowledge. The discovery crystallized everything, the reality of our situation, and the way our lives and values had drifted apart. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Vincent had been borrowing money behind my back. The thought of how deep and long-standing his debts were made my stomach turn. That was the moment the decision was made. I needed a divorce. I could no longer picture a future with someone who kept such major financial secrets from me. My feelings for him evaporated completely. That evening, I waited for him in the living room, the decision weighing heavily on me but clear in my mind. When he finally walked through the door, I didn't hesitate. "Vincent, you're back late." He looked surprised. "Yikes, what are you doing up so early? What's wrong? Can I stay awake?" I asked flatly. "Nothing's wrong. I just want to go to bed," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Of course you do. You've been out until now. After all," he dismissed my concerns. "If you're going to be sarcastic, save it. I'm exhausted from working. Unlike you," he snapped. "Right? I'm sorry," I said, my words hollow as the reality of our situation settled in. I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts before speaking. "Actually, I have something important to tell you. Let's get a divorce." Vincent looked at me, stunned. "Huh? What are you saying all of a sudden?" I've been thinking about it for a while now, I continued calmly. You've been living off me, and yet you ask how I'll survive after the divorce. You hardly provide enough for me to live on as it is. Besides, as a nurse, I managed before, and I can manage again. If money is such an issue, then yes, I think a divorce is the best step. He stood frozen, speechless, before locking himself in the bedroom. The next day, true to his word, albeit reluctantly, he took a day off and accompanied me to our lawyer. He signed the divorce petition with a heavy thud on the lawyer's desk. Our separation turned out to be simpler than I had expected. Throughout it all, Vincent kept muttering about regret, but I chose to ignore him. Afterward, I decided to return to my parents' home temporarily. When I explained the situation to them, they offered their full support, encouraging me to move forward. Grateful for their backing, I began packing up my belongings, ready to start anew, free from the weight of a marriage that had become untenable. While sorting through my things, I decided to clean my father-in-law's room one last time. As I went through his chest of drawers, I stumbled upon his will. Curious but composed, I informed Vincent, who, to my surprise, showed an unexpected burst of excitement. He tore open the envelope and eagerly read the contents, his eyes wide. But his enthusiasm quickly shifted to dismay as he read aloud, mumbling about some mistake in the document. From what I could gather, the will left several stocks, which his father had owned to me. Additionally, it included a heartfelt letter expressing gratitude towards me. Vincent, in disbelief, protested, "No, this can't be true. I'm the only son. Normally, I inherit everything, don't I?" "That may be so, but the will clearly states otherwise," I replied calmly. "This is ridiculous. This can't be valid," he sputtered, but the signature on the document was unmistakable. The shock was too much for him. He fainted and collapsed on the floor. I quickly called an ambulance, but as I watched the paramedics take him away, I realized I was already detached from his life. There seemed no reason to delay my departure any longer, so I finished packing and left for my parents' home. Once settled, I reached out to one of Vincent's relatives, who had always been kind to me, to inform her about the divorce. She listened intently, her expression growing more pained as I recounted my story. After I finished, she embraced me warmly, but her demeanor was awkward and troubled. She then revealed, in a hushed voice, that Vincent had accumulated a substantial gambling debt long before we moved in with his father. It had started shortly after we got married. His frequent visits to consumer finance companies had even sparked rumors in our small community. Her revelations added new layers of understanding to the struggles we have faced, confirming that my decision to leave was justified. The support from Vincent's relative was comforting, reaffirming that I was not alone in recognizing the difficulties caused by his actions. It was deeply unsettling to realize that while I had been oblivious, others in our community were well aware of Vincent's financial troubles, and the rumors had been rampant. Before moving in with my father-in-law, my life had been consumed by my job. Afterward, my focus shifted entirely to caregiving, leaving no room for social interactions where such information might have come to light. Meanwhile, Vincent had been misleading everyone, confidently claiming that he would swiftly clear his debts with the inheritance he was certain to receive. It seemed everyone in our circle knew about it, except me. The rumors eventually reached his father, prompting him to draft a will that intentionally excluded Vincent, likely to correct his son's misguided expectations and irresponsible behavior. Vincent, who had recklessly accumulated debts across various quarters, was banking entirely on an inheritance that never materialized. When he realized he would receive nothing, the shock was too much for him, and he fainted. After a brief hospital stay, Vincent was discharged and faced the grim reality of managing his debts alone, scraping by day to day. As for me, I returned to my parents' home, took some time to gather my thoughts and heal, and eventually returned to my nursing career. Being back at work, immersed in a profession I love, has been rejuvenating. For now, I have no interest in thinking about marriage again. My priority is my career, dedicating myself to a job that brings fulfillment and stability. The return to nursing not only marks a return to normalcy but also a step toward rebuilding my independence and focusing on my well-being. My name is Layla, and I was born in a quiet suburban town to my wonderful parents, Logan and Madison. My father worked for a local news channel, while my mother cleaned at the hospital. Though we weren't wealthy, our home was filled with love and contentment. Life moved along smoothly until I turned 14, when everything shifted in an instant. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when my parents were out at a dinner party, leaving me at home with my grandmother. I was lost in a cartoon when the phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the air. I'll never forget the cold shiver that ran through me as I heard my grandmother sobbing quietly in the kitchen. In the days that followed, confusion and sorrow blurred everything. My mother had died instantly in a car accident, and although my father survived, he was gravely injured, his legs permanently impaired. As he lay frail and broken in the hospital, my father whispered apologies, his voice thick with emotion. As a child, I couldn't understand his guilt. It wasn't his fault. An irresponsible drunk driver was to blame. But as I grew older, I came to realize that his apologies were not for the accident itself, but for the hardships we would now face and the profound changes in our lives. Still, my father's spirit was unbreakable. Once home and adjusting to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work as a search marketing specialist for the city's major newspaper. His writing abilities remained as sharp as ever, unaffected by his physical limitations. As a teenager, I found strength in our close bond. We shared a love for classic films and lively debates over literature. He supported me through my academic challenges, and when it was time to head to college, he encouraged me to embrace new experiences at State University, where I chose to study forensic accounting. It was there I met Lucy, who quickly became my best friend. Through her, I met her second cousin, Aiden. He was compassionate and quick-witted with a sharp mind that matched my own. He accepted my family's situation without hesitation, and when he met my father, they bonded instantly over their mutual love of classic rock. Aiden's respect for how I managed my life and responsibilities filled me with quiet pride. College passed in a blur, and after graduation, life began to settle into place. I landed a job as a tax manager, while Aiden became a commercial driver. Our relationship flourished, and 4 years later, Aiden proposed in the same park where we had shared our first date. Beneath the canopy of autumn leaves, I said yes with one important condition, that I could not leave my father, who still needed my care. Aiden, with a reassuring smile, accepted without hesitation, sealing our future with love and understanding. In sharing this story, it's clear that life's unpredictability can tear apart everything we know, but it can also stitch things back together in surprising, beautiful ways. Our current arrangement may have been unconventional, but I wouldn't change it for anything. We all live together quite comfortably now. My father's apartment is spacious enough for the 5 of us. Our wedding was intimate and beautiful. Despite being in a wheelchair, Dad insisted on rolling down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as I held Aiden's hand, feeling like I was living in a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its challenges, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Natalie, and my sister-in-law, Ruby. From the start, it was clear they disapproved of me. During our first meeting, Natalie had asked, her face twisting in distaste, "So, your father is handicapped?" I corrected her calmly. "He's disabled, but he works as a search marketing specialist." "Oh," she said dismissively, clearly uninterested. "How nice." Her indifference stunned, but it wasn't as hurtful as when she later turned to Aiden and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are plenty of nice girls from reputable families." I felt a rush of indignation, but Aiden immediately stepped in. "Mom, Layla comes from a fine family too. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." His words quieted Natalie for the moment, but I could see her disapproval still lingering in her eyes. Ruby, following her mother's lead, was just as distant. After the wedding, Aiden moved in with Dad and me. We settled into a comfortable routine. I worked at the tax office, and Aiden spent days on the road. When he was home, we enjoyed meals together, but whenever Natalie and Ruby visited, the atmosphere in our home shifted. They paraded around as if they owned the place, barely acknowledging my father. Once I overheard Natalie whisper to Ruby, "It's such a pity Aiden ended up with her and her crippled father. What if they have kids? Can you imagine the genes?" I was livid, but I stayed silent for Aiden's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening, after another tense visit from Natalie and Ruby, I couldn't hold back my tears. Aiden found me crying in our bedroom. Hey, he comforted me, pulling me close. "What's wrong?" I managed to say through my sobs, "Your mom and sister, they despise me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Aiden's expression hardened. "That's absurd. You and Dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words reassured me, but the tension with Natalie and Ruby remained. Over time, Aiden's trucking business thrived, and he was frequently on the road. I missed him during his absences, but I kept busy with work and spent my evenings with Dad. Then, one crisp autumn night, as I helped Dad into bed, Aiden called, his voice full of excitement. "Lee, I've been thinking," he began. "How would you feel about us buying a townhouse? It would be more accessible for Dad in his wheelchair. He could spend more time outdoors, and you could even have a garden to tend to." The more Aiden spoke about the idea, the more intrigued I became. I glanced at my dad, who was trying not to show he'd been eavesdropping on the conversation. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, switching the phone to speaker mode. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "A garden sounds wonderful," he confessed, a smile breaking across his face. "And it would make getting outside so much easier." That was the deciding moment. Over the next several weeks, Aiden and I dedicated ourselves to finding a new home. Eventually, we discovered the ideal place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a wheelchair-accessible shower for Dad, and a lovely backyard. Although taking out a mortgage was daunting, our combined incomes and the rent from Dad's previous apartment made it possible. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll always remember the joy on Dad's face as he wheeled out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he beamed, his eyes gleaming with gratitude. In the months that followed, we settled in comfortably. I started a small vegetable garden, and Dad spent hours outside, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Life felt blissful. Then came our housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Natalie and Ruby. They arrived late as usual and immediately surveyed everything with barely hidden envy. During the house tour, Natalie's calculating glances became obvious. When we reached the master bedroom, she leaned in with a sly grin. "You know, Layla," she whispered, "this room would be perfect for Aiden and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I was stunned. "Excuse me," I managed to say, but she continued, undeterred. "Your father isn't well. He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be enough for him." Before I could respond, she strolled out to the patio, where Dad was chatting with guests. To my horror, she grabbed his wheelchair and began pushing him toward the driveway. "Natalie," I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing? If you want him outside, he can stay right here." I was furious and shaken. Thankfully, Aiden heard the commotion and came running, his face flushed with anger. "Mom," he shouted, his tone sharp, "what are you doing? Let go of Logan's chair now." Natalie looked taken aback by his sternness. "But honey, I don't want to hear it." Aiden cut her off. "You and Ruby need to leave now." After they left, Aiden apologized deeply to both Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea she'd go this far." Dad reached out, patting Aiden's hand gently. "It's not your fault, son. Some people just don't understand what's important." Life gradually found a new rhythm after the housewarming debacle. Natalie and Ruby kept their distance, which was fine by me. Aiden threw himself into his work, taking on longer hauls to help us manage our new mortgage commitments. It was a challenging time, but it ultimately brought us closer as a family, fortified by resilience and understanding. Balancing my role at the tax office with caring for our home and Dad, the years passed seamlessly. Though Aiden was frequently away, his presence at home always brought us joy. My father's health remained stable, and he enjoyed his days gardening or editing from his workspace at home. Then, one fateful day at work, my phone rang. A chill ran through me as the caller introduced himself as Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. His words washed over me like cold water as he delivered the heart-wrenching news of Aiden's severe accident. The details of the head-on collision blurred together, the gravity of his words not fully hitting until after the call ended. When reality finally set in, I was left with an emptiness I'd never known. Aiden was no longer with us. The following week passed in a haze of grief and arrangements, carried out in a numb state as I struggled to process the weight of the loss. I knew it was crucial to personally inform Natalie, Aiden's mother, about the tragedy. When I called, her initial sharp tone quickly twisted into harsh accusations, blaming me for Aiden's accident. She claimed his demanding work schedule was my fault, her words leaving me stunned and devastated. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me in tears. Aiden's funeral took place on a gray, drizzly day that mirrored the somber mood. Though his mother and sister were notably absent, the community's heartfelt turnout showed how respected and loved he was. My father stood beside me, offering quiet strength as we braved the sadness together. When we returned home, something felt off. The lights were on, and I could hear movement inside. A bizarre sight, especially since I had double-checked that everything was off before leaving. Fearing a break-in on this already heavy day, I cautiously approached with my father. But as we stepped inside, the voices sounded strangely familiar, revealing a shocking twist. In the living room, I found Natalie and Ruby, surrounded by boxes and scattered furniture. What on earth is going on? I asked, confusion briefly breaking through my sorrow. Natalie looked up, her expression a mockery of sympathy. "Oh, Leila, dear," she said smoothly, "we're just helping you pack. After all, you can't afford to stay here now that Aiden's gone." I was too stunned to respond at first. Ruby chimed in with a saccharine smile. "Don't worry, you can move back into your dad's apartment. It's nice and cozy." A surge of anger rose within me. "Get out," I said quietly but firmly, holding back the flood of emotions. "Get out of my house, now." Natalie looked genuinely surprised. "This house is ours now, along with all of Aiden's things. We're his family, after all." I held her gaze, defiant. "Funny, you didn't seem like family today at his funeral." "Oh, that's right, you weren't there." Natalie waved my words away dismissively. "We had other things to take care of. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We need this cleared out by tomorrow." The audacity left me speechless for a moment. They hadn't warned him, hadn't even shown up to honor him, yet they felt entitled to everything we built together. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. Natalie and Ruby exchanged a glance, clearly unprepared for resistance. "Leila," Natalie began, but I cut her off. "You have 5 minutes to leave before I call the cops. This is my home. Aiden and I bought it together, and you have no right to be here." My voice was unwavering, and something in my tone must have struck a nerve as they slowly gathered their belongings. Still, Natalie couldn't resist a final threat as they left. "This isn't over, Leila. Expect a call from our lawyers." The following days were a whirlwind of grief, anxiety, and endless paperwork as I began sorting through Aiden's affairs, wary of Natalie and Ruby's next move. About a week later, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, fearing it was the beginning of Natalie's legal threats. "Mrs. Aiden," a professional voice asked. "This is Anthony from Anthony and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will." "A will?" I whispered, taken aback. Aiden had never mentioned a will. "Yes, he came to us 4 months ago," Mr. Anthony continued. "He was very clear about his intentions." The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Anthony, anxiously waiting to learn the details of Aiden's will. He offered me his condolences and then opened the file. "As I mentioned, your husband drafted a will," he said, and began to read. "I, Aiden, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Lila." I gasped, tears filling my eyes. Mr. Anthony continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Lila use these resources to care for herself and her father, Logan, whom I have come to love as my own. Even in death, Aiden was protecting us." Mr. Anthony handed me a letter from Aiden, and with trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Layla, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Logan. Please know that you two were the best things that ever happened to me. I drafted this will because I knew the nature of my mother and sister, and I didn't want you to worry. I had to ensure that you and Logan would be safeguarded in case something happened to me. You and Logan are my true family, not them. Take good care of each other, live fully, and remember, I'll always be looking out for you. With all my love, Aiden." I held the letter tightly, my tears flowing freely. My father, by my side, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, tears in his eyes as well. Mr. Anthony allowed us a moment to compose ourselves. Then he informed us that, because of the accident, Aiden's insurance would pay out the full value of his policy. "What does that mean?" I asked, still choked up. Mr. Anthony gave a gentle smile. "It means you'll receive enough money to clear your mortgage and more." As we left the office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Aiden had indeed taken care of everything. But as we arrived home, I spotted a familiar car nearby. Natalie's sleek sedan. My heart sank. Natalie and Ruby were on our porch, but this time I felt fortified with Aiden's letter in my pocket and his love giving me strength. "Layla," Natalie started, her tone overly sweet, We need to talk about Aiden's estate. I stood firm. No, Natalie, we really don't. Aiden left everything to me. It's all legal, and you know why? Because we were his family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing. Natalie was momentarily speechless, and Ruby, looking uneasy, quickly tugged at her arm, urging her to retreat. They left, but I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. In the following weeks, I managed Aiden's affairs, and as promised, the insurance money arrived. It was enough to pay off our mortgage with a bit extra. One afternoon, while sorting through Aiden's things, I discovered a journal in his desk. Inside were his handwritten plans and dreams, including starting a college fund for the children we hoped to have. Reading his words, I felt a deep ache for the future we had planned together. That night, I struggled to sleep, haunted by what might have been. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Aiden, smiling and reassuring me that everything would be okay. I awoke with a strange sense of peace, but the following days brought a new, persistent queasiness. At first, I thought it was stress. But soon, a nagging thought crept in. After a week of wondering, I went to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test, my hands shaking as I waited for the result. When I finally looked, 2 distinct blue lines confirmed my suspicion. Overwhelmed, I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, a storm of joy, fear, grief, and hope washing over me. My dad knocked, his voice concerned. "Layla, everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my cheeks, and held up the test. "I'm pregnant, Dad." He pulled me into a tight embrace, comforting me with the same tenderness he had shown me when I was a child. "It's okay," he soothed. "You're not alone in this. This baby is a blessing, a part of Aiden that will live on." His words resonated deeply. This child was not only a continuation of my love with Aiden, but also a symbol of new beginnings. My fears started to dissolve, replaced by a newfound strength. "You're right," I said, wiping away my tears. "This baby is a blessing and will be just fine." Dad smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling with affection. "That's my girl. Now, let's get something to eat. You're eating for 2 now." As we went to the kitchen, I felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Dad became my rock, constantly encouraging me as we prepared for the baby's arrival. One sunny afternoon, while I was tending the garden we had built together, a familiar car pulled up, breaking the peaceful moment. It was Natalie and Ruby. They approached the porch with expressions of discomfort and desperation. "Layla," Natalie began, her sharp tone now softened by circumstance, "we need to talk. We've hit some hard times. Could we possibly stay in your dad's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet?" Their audacity stunned me, but I remained calm. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible," I said firmly. "I don't wish to maintain contact with either of you anymore." Natalie's gaze dropped to my belly, her face twisting with disdain. "You're pregnant already, you little?" Her words dripped with venom, but I stayed composed, refusing to let her affect me. "My personal life is none of your business," I replied calmly. Natalie, realizing she was defeated, huffed in frustration before turning on her heel, pulling Ruby along. As they left, a profound peace washed over me. I had defended my family and upheld my dignity, and I knew, without a doubt, that Aiden would have been proud. "Hi, my name is Amy, and I work as a nurse." After another bustling day at the local hospital, a place I'm grateful has no night shifts, I finally arrived home, a bit later than usual. "I'm home," I called out as I stepped through the door. "Welcome back," came the cheerful reply from my daughter Janice. At only 8 years old, Janice spends many afternoons alone waiting for me to come home. It tugs at my heart, seeing her so self-reliant at such a young age, and I often feel guilty about it. Yet I know I'm lucky compared to some of my colleagues who work erratic hours in facilities with fewer family-friendly schedules. "Where's your dad today?" I asked her, hanging up my coat. "He hasn't come home yet," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "It feels like I haven't seen him in forever." My husband, Jack, is a workaholic. He's rarely home, and when he is, it's almost like he's a stranger at the dinner table. On his days off, he's at his mother's house, tending her garden or having dinner with her. Meanwhile, he's missed every one of Janice's soccer games and spelling bees, a reality that's put a strain on our family. "I'm sorry you're alone so often, honey," I said, feeling the weight of our situation. "It's okay, Mom. You're here every day, and that's enough for me," Janice replied, trying to sound brave. I hugged her, wishing things were different, that we could be a typical family, spending time together every night. Then one day, unexpectedly, Jack came home early. The dinner table was quiet that night until, out of the blue, Jack broke the silence. "Hey, why don't we go to Hawaii for the holidays?" he said. I was stunned, barely able to believe my ears. After all this time, Jack was suddenly proposing a family trip. We hadn't taken a proper vacation in years. Janice was over the moon. "We can go to Hawaii. I want to go. I want to go," she shouted excitedly, her happiness infectious. Reluctantly, I agreed. I had mixed feelings about it, especially when I realized that Jack had planned the trip around his mother Charlotte's birthday. Despite my reservations, I couldn't deny Janice this opportunity. The day of the trip arrived, and both Jack and I were busy with work. We planned to meet at the airport, but my day ran later than expected, and Janice and I barely made it in time, arriving breathless and frazzled. But when we looked around, Jack and Charlotte were nowhere to be seen. Confusion turned to frustration. Where could they have gone? I tried calling Jack's phone, only to get a recorded message saying it was off or out of range. Worried, I approached the airline desk for help. Then a staff member approached me. "Are you Amy Martin?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, startled. "I was asked to give this to you," she said, handing me a small note. I unfolded it, feeling a pang of dread as I read Charlotte's scrawled words. "It'll just be the two of us on this trip. If you can't be on time, we won't wait for you. Why don't you just camp out somewhere? Bye, Charlotte." My heart sank. Janice looked up at me with wide, anxious eyes. "What's wrong, Mom?" Trying to shield her from the truth, I forced a smile. "Oh, it's nothing, sweetie. It looks like your dad and Grandma went ahead without us. I'm sorry, but it seems we can't go to Hawaii." "But can't we get on another flight and go after them?" she asked, hope gleaming in her eyes. I hesitated. The cost of a last-minute flight was more than I could afford. "Yes, we can try," I replied, hoping my voice sounded convincing. Just then, a commotion nearby caught my attention. An elderly man collapsed a few steps in front of us. Instinctively, I rushed to his side, my nurse training kicking in. His breathing had stopped, and I quickly cleared his airway, finding it blocked by a bit of vomit. "Please, someone call an ambulance," I shouted, administering first aid. Paramedics arrived swiftly, and the man was taken to the hospital, where he regained consciousness. Later, he looked up at me and asked, "Were you the one who saved me?" "Well, yes," I replied modestly, a mix of relief and pride filling my heart. "I just did what anyone would do," I replied, modestly brushing off the praise. "That's not true," Raymond said, a mix of relief and gratitude softening his face. "Thank you so much. I thought I was done for." He introduced himself and insisted on showing his appreciation, though I assured him it was all in a day's work. After a few minutes of chatting, Raymond asked, "Were you traveling somewhere?" His question brought me back to the reality of our situation, and I wondered how best to explain the chaotic turn of events that led us here. "Yes, we were supposed to catch a flight to Hawaii," I said, feeling a wave of disappointment. "But we missed it. We were already running late because of my work schedule." Raymond's expression grew sympathetic. "That's a shame. I bet your daughter was excited," he said, glancing at Janice. "Why don't you just get another ticket?" Embarrassed, I admitted, "The truth is, we can't really afford to buy another one right now." I gave him a small, sad smile, not expecting anything from the conversation. Raymond seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded with resolve. "As a thank you for saving my life, let me buy your tickets. That way, you two can still make your trip." "Oh no, I couldn't accept that," I protested, but Raymond was already calling over an airline staff member. After a quick conversation on the phone, he returned, smiling. "If I don't thank you properly, I'll never rest easy," he insisted, half joking. Just then, the note from Jack and Charlotte fell from my pocket, slipping away unnoticed in the commotion. Thanks to Raymond's generosity and insistence, Janice and I soon found ourselves on a plane to Hawaii, comfortably seated in business class, an upgrade that made our journey even more enjoyable. When we landed, I realized I hadn't confirmed where Jack and Charlotte were staying, a nagging oversight as we collected our luggage. As we exited the terminal, a man approached us. "Hello, are you Amy and Janice?" he asked warmly. Yes, that's right," I replied, surprised. "Nice to meet you," he said, handing me a business card bearing the logo of a well-known logistics company, sparking my curiosity. "The chairman of our company wanted to make sure you were taken care of," he continued, smiling. My eyes widened. "The elderly man I helped, he's the chairman." The man nodded. Yes, thank you very much for what you did for him. I was stunned. It hadn't even crossed my mind that Raymond, the kind man we'd helped at the airport, was the chairman of a major company. The realization left me a little dazed as he continued, "We'll be taking you both to your hotel now, as per the chairman's instructions. Please enjoy your trip to Hawaii." A sleek black limousine awaited us, and as we stepped outside, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I'd never been in such an elegant vehicle before, and I found myself checking my shoes, making sure they were clean before climbing in. Janice's eyes sparkled as she took in the plush, luxurious interior. "Wow, this is amazing," she exclaimed, her excitement infectious. As we drove through Hawaii's breathtaking landscapes, the views unfolding through the limousine windows seemed like scenes from a dream. Palm trees swayed against a perfect sky, and the air seemed to hum with that eternal summer feeling. After the chaotic start to our journey, I felt deeply grateful to have made it here, and Janice was captivated, her face pressed against the glass as she took in every detail. When we finally arrived at the Grand Hotel, its opulent exterior took my breath away. But as we approached the entrance, a sudden worry hit me. "Oh no, I didn't book a room," I murmured, concerned about the oversight. The man accompanying us quickly reassured me. "No need to worry. We've already reserved a room for you on the top floor." I hesitated. "But I don't have the money for this," I confessed, my anxiety returning. He smiled reassuringly. "It's all taken care of. The chairman insists." I was overwhelmed by Raymond's generosity, and the VIP treatment felt like stepping into a dream. When we entered the hotel and were shown to our room, it turned out to be a lavish suite with an expansive view of the ocean, its vast windows framing a spectacular sunset. It was as if the whole room was a luxurious retreat, more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. Janice and I stood in awe, gazing out at the stunning scene, filled with gratitude for this unexpected kindness that had transformed our trip into an unforgettable adventure. During our stay, we were assigned a dedicated staff member who was always available to help with any need. Each meal was a work of art. On one memorable evening, they prepared an exquisite steak right before us, turning dinner into a culinary performance that left us speechless. After such a lavish meal, Janice and I wandered around the hotel lobby, admiring the decor, when we suddenly heard a commotion nearby. Drawn by the raised voices, we moved closer to see what was happening, and to my surprise, I saw my husband Jack and my mother-in-law Charlotte in a heated exchange with the hotel staff. Confused, I called out, "Hey, what are you both doing here?" They turned, equally shocked. "Amy, why are you here?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "We came here as planned," I replied, feeling my own confusion rise. "But why did you send that harsh note? You were the one who suggested this trip." Jack glanced at Charlotte, as if searching for backup, but then faltered. "Well, you were late. It's your fault," he stammered, trying to justify. Anger and sadness welled up in me. Yes, we were late, but telling us to just camp out was uncalled for. That wasn't right. Charlotte stood by, unmoved, which only deepened my sense of betrayal. Turning back to the hotel staff, I asked, "What's going on here?" Jack looked frustrated as he explained, "They won't let us check in. I don't understand why." Sensing we needed answers, I addressed the hotel staff member directly. "Is there a problem?" The staff member's tone turned serious. "We were informed that these individuals abandoned our important guests, your daughter and yourself. As per our instructions, we're not permitted to offer them accommodations." In an instant, the pieces fell into place. Raymond's influence was clear. As the chairman of a major company and a man of strong principles, he'd evidently taken a protective stance toward us. Jack and Charlotte's faces reflected both shock and confusion as they began to understand the depth of Raymond's involvement. "What is going on here?" Jack muttered, looking both bewildered and uneasy. "It's a long story," I explained, "but essentially, Raymond's making it clear he won't tolerate what you did to us." This trip had taken an unexpected turn, revealing complexities in our relationships, and a surprising ally. Jack shook his head, clearly puzzled. "Who even knows about all that?" Reaching into my bag, I pulled out Raymond's business card, the one given to me when we arrived. Jack's face drained of color as he read the name. This is from a major client of mine," he stammered, his hands beginning to shake. Charlotte turned pale too. "Are you saying you know the chairman of this company?" "Yes," I replied. "I helped him when he collapsed at the airport, and to thank us he booked our flight and this hotel." Charlotte's face lost all color, and she seemed to sway on her feet. "Mom, are you okay?" Jack asked, reaching out to steady her. I approached cautiously, concerned despite the tension. "He's in the same gym club as me," Raymond explained. "I see him occasionally, and everyone there respects him. But what a coincidence this is." Charlotte was visibly shaken by the unexpected connection, while Jack simply nodded, stunned. "Such a small world," he murmured, feeling the weight of it all. Before this encounter, I had no idea there was any link between Raymond and Charlotte, but when Raymond had discovered the note I dropped at the airport, it became clear. He picked it up and read it, his expression shifting to disbelief. "Amy, what on earth is this?" he'd asked, his voice mixing shock and disapproval. Hesitantly, I explained how Jack and Charlotte had left us behind. His reaction had been immediate. "How horrible, unforgivable," he declared, his tone leaving no room for doubt. From then on, his actions reflected a clear stance on our situation. As Raymond pieced together the details, he asked, "Is your mother-in-law's last name Martin? Charlotte Martin?" "Yes, that's her," I confirmed, still reeling from the series of revelations. Raymond nodded, saying he knew Charlotte from his gym and expressing his disbelief that she would abandon family. Turning back to Jack and Charlotte, I couldn't suppress a smirk at the irony. "Well, since you two plan to go on this trip together, I guess Janice and I will just enjoy it on our own," I said. "Charlotte, maybe you could camp out here for a night under the Hawaiian stars. How's that sound?" "That's terrible. You're the rudest person ever," they protested, clearly missing the irony of having their own words thrown back at them. They called me rude, yet it was their dismissive message that had started this. I chuckled, taking Janice's hand. "Let's go," I said, leaving them behind as the hotel staff firmly turned them away. "We don't have rooms for you both at this hotel," they were told, finally forced to leave. And so Janice and I enjoyed our trip, just the two of us. The bond between Janice and her father was nearly severed, and I felt no urgency to repair it. Raymond's kindness in making this vacation possible had turned what began as a troubling experience into a beautiful adventure, one that refreshed and delighted us both. When we returned home, we were full of gratitude and happy memories. Jack, however, returned looking exhausted and defeated. As it turned out, Raymond's influence extended further than I'd imagined. No hotel in Hawaii had been willing to take them in, leaving Jack and Charlotte to camp outdoors. Jack also faced repercussions at work when his boss informed him that Raymond's company was considering canceling their contract due to his behavior. Meanwhile, Charlotte's gym friends grew distant, treating her coldly enough that she eventually left the club altogether. Once dedicated to fitness, she now spent her days in front of the television, a shadow of her former self. This ordeal made it clear that our marriage was over. We decided to divorce, with Janice's custody naturally going to me. I didn't seek alimony or child support, confident in my ability to support her on my own. It all felt surreal, as if fate itself had guided these events. Being late to the airport that day had led me to meet Raymond, an acquaintance of Charlotte's, and that simple act of kindness had brought us an unforgettable vacation. Looking back, I felt no regrets. Jack's priorities had always clashed with mine, often putting Charlotte's needs above ours. Now, with Janice by my side, I felt complete. The joy she brought me outweighed any sorrow from the past, and together, we looked forward to a happy, fulfilling future. Just the two of us. I met John shortly after graduating from college. He swept me off my feet with his charm and ambition, and before I knew it, we were married and living in the small apartment he had purchased before our wedding. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and I loved every inch of it. Soon after, our daughter Sarah was born, perfect, with John's blue eyes and my curly hair. It felt like we had everything: a loving family, a cozy home, and promising careers ahead of us. I started working as a secretary at a small but growing company. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work and got along with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was making strides at his construction firm. He'd come home with stories about big projects and even bigger deals. I was proud of him, even though his long hours often meant I was alone with Sarah. But over time, something in John changed. He'd come home late, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who called?" he'd demand. "Why were you all dressed up?" At first, I laughed it off, but soon his jealousy became suffocating. One night, after a long interrogation about a work event, I snapped, "You think I'm cheating?" "With who, John?" "The mailman." He didn't crack a smile. "Don't play dumb, Kelly. I see how men look at you." And your boss, he's happily married with 3 kids. I cut him off, desperate. For God's sake, John, I'm your wife. I love you. But my words fell on deaf ears. The arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at our marriage. I had always been faithful, always would be, but his distress was poisoning everything. Through it all, Sarah remained blissfully unaware. At 10, her world revolved around school, friends, and her iPad. I tried to shield her from our fights, but kids always know more than we think. The irony wasn't lost on me. John was the one always coming home late, always going on business trips. If anyone had reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in our love. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, after a particularly nasty fight, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. John's soft snores filled the room, but I felt a million miles away from him. How had we gotten here? When had love turned into suspicion? Trust into accusation? I thought about leaving, about taking Sarah and starting over. But where would we go? What kind of life could I give her on a secretary's salary? And despite everything, I still loved John, the man he used to be, the man I hoped he could be again. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. My mom, the rock I'd always leaned on, had a stroke. It came out of nowhere, leaving us all reeling. Mom had always been healthy, throwing herself into gardening and book clubs after Dad's death. She lived in a gorgeous house in the fancy part of town, courtesy of Dad's life insurance and smart investments. I used to joke that she was living the life of a retired movie star. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I got the call at work. Mom couldn't speak, couldn't move her left side. I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals, doctors, and terrifying medical jargon. I visited every top clinic in the area, desperate for someone to tell me that Mom would be okay. But the prognosis wasn't good. The stroke had left her bedridden, needing round-the-clock care. I was overwhelmed. How could I take care of Mom, manage my job, look after Sarah, and deal with John's jealousy all at once? It felt like drowning in slow motion. Then, out of the blue, John suggested something. "We should move into your mom's house," he said one night over dinner. I nearly choked on my pasta. "What?" "Think about it, Kelly," he continued, his eyes lighting up. "It's a great house in a fantastic neighborhood. Sarah would have her own room, maybe even a playroom. Your mom needs care, and you'd be right there. Plus, we could rent out this apartment for some extra cash." I had to admit, it made sense. Mom's house was far nicer than our apartment, and the idea of not having to commute to take care of her was appealing. But still, it felt weird. "I don't know, John. It's Mom's house. We can't just barge in." He insisted. "I bet she'd love the company. It's better than a nursing home, right?" He had a point. Mom had always made it clear she didn't want to end up in a nursing home. Maybe this could work. The next day, I brought up the idea with Mom. To my surprise, her face lit up at the suggestion. "Oh, Kelly," she said, her voice weak but excited. "I'd love that. This old house needs some life in it again." And just like that, it was decided. We were moving into Mom's house. As I started packing up our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something big. But I didn't know if it would be good or bad. John was over the moon about the move. He kept talking about the garden he'd plant, the man cave he'd set up in the basement. Even Sarah seemed excited about having a bigger room. Moving into Mom's house brought a whole new set of challenges. Taking care of a stroke patient was a full-time job, one I wasn't equipped to handle on my own. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I hired a nurse to help during the day. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She arrived every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, taking care of Mom's basic needs. But evenings and nights were all on me. I'd come home from work, exhausted, only to start my second shift as Mom's caretaker. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and often silent. I'd change her diaper, giving her as much dignity as I could. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the meds, and finally dinner. It was grueling work, both physically and emotionally. Seeing my vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state broke my heart every day. But I did it because I loved her, because she would have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11, I thought she'd be old enough to understand, to help out even. But boy, was I wrong. One evening, as I was heading to Mom's room, I saw Sarah dart past me, her hand clamped firmly over her nose. "Sarah," I called out, "where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma?" She shook her head violently. "No way. It smells gross in there." I was taken aback. "Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now." "I don't care," she spat back, her voice full of disdain. "She's disgusting. I'm not going near her." Before I could say anything else, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned and hurt, trying to process what had just happened. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John for support, but when I needed him most, I found nothing. "Not my problem," he would say every time I asked for help with Mom. "I didn't sign up for this." It stung, but I couldn't entirely blame him. None of us had signed up for this life. Still, as I watched him play video games with Sarah or take her out for ice cream while I was elbow deep in adult diapers and medication schedules, I couldn't help but feel resentful. The one silver lining, though, was seeing how close John and Sarah had become. They'd always had a good relationship, but now it seemed even stronger. I'd hear them laughing together in the living room or see them huddled over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It warmed my heart, even as it made me feel more isolated. 2 years passed in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still required constant care. I was exhausted, but I had found a rhythm, just barely. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was changing Mom's sheets. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. "Kelly, dear," she said, her voice laced with concern. "I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit with a company of young women, different ones, always very pretty." I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. That night, I confronted John. "Oh, those are just potential tenants," he said smoothly, brushing me off and showing them the apartment. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing like a weed. A week later, I found the lipstick stain. It was on the collar of his white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hand shook as I held it up to the light, trying to convince myself it was just a pen mark or a food stain. But deep down, I knew better. I waited until his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I'd even opened the door. There was John in our bed with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "What are you doing here?" John exclaimed, not even having the decency to look ashamed. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the scene before me, feeling my world crumble around me. "Look, Kelly," he said coldly, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but let's be honest. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mom. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and left, my mind already racing toward what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way. But in the end, we stood before a judge dividing up our life together as if it were nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. Then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. At 12, Sarah was old enough to have a say, and her choice broke my heart. "I want to live with Dad," she declared, her voice steady. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing, and Mom's always trying to make me help." The judge nodded sympathetically, taking into account John's higher income, the stability he could provide, and Sarah's clear preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to focus on what was best for Sarah. John could offer her opportunities I couldn't. Private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me, a schedule that looked neat and tidy on paper but felt like a gaping wound in my heart as I watched Sarah pack her things, excitedly chatting about her new room at Dad's. I felt like I was losing everything. My marriage was over. My daughter was leaving. And I was left with a house that felt more like a hospital than a home. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, have ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, slowly, things began to change. Sarah started canceling plans. "I have a sleepover," she'd say. "Dad's taking me to a concert." I tried to be understanding, to be the cool mom who didn't make a fuss, but each cancellation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail, and text messages were met with one-word responses, if I got any response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice informed me that the number I was trying to reach had blocked my calls. My hand shook as I dialed John's number. "What do you want, Kelly?" His voice was cold, annoyed. "John, I can't reach Sarah. She's blocked my number. What's going on?" There was a long pause. "Look, Kelly, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that. She's my daughter. She's also a person with her own feelings," John shot back. "And right now, she doesn't want to be around all that negativity at your place. I mean, the sickness, the sadness. Sarah needs stability. She needs a normal family. She sees Lisa as a mother figure now. She's got a normal life here, 2 parents, no sick relatives, no drama. Why can't you just let her be happy?" I couldn't speak. Tears streamed down my face, and I was thankful John couldn't see me. "Look," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "I know this is hard, but if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force it. It'll only push her away more." I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my rights as a mother, but a small, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I pushed too hard, I might lose Sarah forever. I sank to the floor, phone clutched to my chest, and sobbed. My little girl, my Sarah, didn't want me anymore. Someone else was being her mother, kissing her goodnight, helping with homework, sharing the moments I was missing. Mom found me hours later, still on the floor. She'd managed to shuffle over with her walker, her face creased with concern. "Kelly," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd been my rock for so long, who I'd been taking care of for years. In that moment, our roles reversed again. I was the child, seeking comfort from my mother. "Oh, Mom," I cried, reaching for her hand. "I've lost her. I've lost my baby girl." Mom squeezed my hand, her touch still weak but full of love. "No, Kelly, you haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. She'll find her way back to you. You'll see." 14 years, it's amazing how time can fly by and drag on simultaneously. Mom's condition improved slightly over the years. She regained some mobility and speech, but caring for her remained a full-time job. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I felt a mixture of grief and shamefully relief. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this big, empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment. No more schedules for medications and therapy sessions. Just me, rattling around in rooms full of memories. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice, I'd know it anywhere. "Mom, it's Sarah. I was hoping we could meet to talk." We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. As I waited, my hand shook around my coffee cup. I spotted a young woman entering. It took me a moment to realize it was Sarah. Gone was the gangly preteen I remembered. In her place stood a poised, beautiful young woman. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We made awkward small talk at first. She filled me in on her life, her job in marketing, her hobbies, her friends. Then she dropped the bombshell. "I'm getting married," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Here's an invitation." My heart swelled with joy and a tinge of sadness. My little girl, getting married, and I'd missed so much. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you." She cut me off abruptly. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why I wanted to meet. I was hoping to talk about Grandma's inheritance. The house, her savings. I want them." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me." "Look, Mom," she said, leaning forward. "That house is in a great area. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there. Start our family there." Anger bubbled up inside me. "Sarah, you haven't set foot in that house in over a decade. You said it disgusted you. You called it a tomb." She waved her hand dismissively. "I was just a kid then. But I've grown up now. Times have changed, and let's face it, I'm Grandma's only grandchild. She would have wanted me to have the house." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Wanted you to have it, Sarah? You didn't even come to her funeral. You didn't call or write for years." "That's ancient history," she snapped. "The point is that house should be mine. I deserve a comfortable life." "Deserve?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. You didn't lift a finger to help when Grandma was sick. I gave up my life to care for her. And now you think you deserve her house. Sarah's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, I'll sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine. She stood up abruptly, snatching the wedding invitation off the table. You know what? Forget it. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there, and I don't need your permission to take what's mine. I sat there, stunned. The daughter I had loved, missed, and longed for all these years was gone. In her place stood a stranger, cold, greedy, and unrecognizable. The days that followed our disastrous meeting passed in a blur of anger, grief, and a deep, numbing emptiness. But as time wore on, something unexpected happened. I felt relieved. The heavy weight of hoping for reconciliation, of longing for a relationship with Sarah, seemed to lift. In its place, there was a strange sort of peace. I didn't attend Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift or a card. Instead, I spent the day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned pets who needed care. It felt fitting somehow. Curiosity got the better of me a few days later, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media. There she was, radiant in white, smiling up at her new husband. For a moment, my heart clenched with the pain of what might have been. But then I saw it. A long rambling post about her cruel mother who refused to attend the wedding and withheld her rightful inheritance out of spite. I read it twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. Part of me wanted to comment, to set the record straight, but what was the point? The people who mattered, my family, those who had seen me care for Mom all those years, knew the truth. As for everyone else, well, their opinions, based on a stranger's social media posts, weren't my concern. A week later, my cousin Jeannie called. Callie, I thought you should know, she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Sarah's been talking about suing you for your mom's estate. I sighed, not surprised. Let her try. That's just it, Jeannie continued. Apparently, she talked to a lawyer. He told her she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Your mom left everything to you, clear as day. I chuckled. Of course Mom had made sure of that. She was always the practical one. Thanks for letting me know, Jeannie, I said. But honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She's made her choices. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Jeannie said, I'm proud of you, Kelly. After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house. Mom's house, now my house. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe here. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved so much. It had gotten a bit overgrown in recent years, but I could still see its potential. Maybe it was time to bring some life back to it. As I stood there, planning my next trip to the garden center, I realized something. The chapter of my life that revolved around Sarah, the hope, the pain, the longing, was finally closing. But that didn't mean my story was over. Far from it. The garden was in full bloom when the call came. I had spent the past few months throwing myself into its restoration, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. The roses Mom had loved so much were just starting to open, their scent filling the air. As I pruned the bushes, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Hello. Mom. Sarah's voice, thick with tears. Mom, I need your help. I froze, the pruning shears still in my hand. Sarah, what's wrong? I'm pregnant, she sobbed, and we're struggling. Mom, I need money. You have to help me. You can't leave your grandchild without anything. I listened silently as her words became more frantic, more accusatory. You abandoned me, Mom. You never tried to contact me, never fought for me, and now you're going to abandon your grandchild too. Something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with calm, unshakable resolve. Sarah, I said, my voice steady. That's enough. She fell silent, probably shocked that I had interrupted her tirade. I never abandoned you, I said. I sent child support every month without fail. I called, I texted, I emailed. You blocked my number. You chose your stepmother. You made your decisions and I respected them, even when it broke my heart. Mom, no. I'm not finished, I said, cutting her off. You're an adult now, about to be a parent yourself. It's time you took responsibility for your choices and your life. I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety net. And I'm not going to be manipulated by lies and guilt trips. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. If you need help, go to your father and stepmother. They're your real family now. Remember, the ones you chose. I took a deep breath. I've made my peace with that. Now you need to make peace with the consequences of your choices. You can't do this, Sarah cried. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are, I said, my voice softening slightly, and I'll always love the little girl you were. But I don't know the woman you've become, and I don't think I want to. I took another deep breath. Goodbye, Sarah. I wish you and your child well, but please, don't contact me again. I ended the call before she could respond. My hand shook slightly as I lowered the phone. For a moment, I stood there in the garden, surrounded by the life I had nurtured, feeling the weight of what had just happened. But then, slowly, I felt a lift. The last ties binding me to a painful past had been cut. The last what-ifs laid to rest. I looked around at the garden, at the house beyond. This was my life now, not defined by loss or regret, but by the choices I made going forward. I picked up my pruning shears and turned back to the rose bush. There was still work to be done, still beauty to cultivate. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt truly, completely free.